Nicole had worked in large firms before and could only assume he wasn't trying to be an ogre, but that panic and stress causes people to become the worst version of themselves. After having suffered this way for longer than most normal people would have found themselves capable of, quiet, good-natured Margaret finally had enough. Gavin had just yelled at her for bringing him the medical dictionary he had asked for before having told her he needed the weather reports for the day in question. God damn it. Everyone seems to think that I'm so well put together, that I don't have bad days or get stressed out. Well, I do. But I can't talk about it or scream or verbally abuse other people because no one wants to hear that I have problems. God forbid, because if I do then the whole bloody world falls apart. And with that she flung the weather reports at Gavin's feet and stormed out towards the break room. Gavin could feel his temper rise, but before he could follow after Margaret to tell her off, Nicole was in front of him, gently holding his arm. In a whisper so low that he could just barely hear her, she said, "If you say something to her now you are going to regret it, and then you'll have to say you're sorry and I will have to deal with you feeling guilty, and I don't want that kind of responsibility." He wasn't sure if he was more shocked by the fact that she was risking incurring his wrath or the fact that she was standing there so calmly touching him. In the few moments of silence that lapsed while he tried to regain his mental footing, she started to speak again. "I have some things that don't need to be done for a while yet. Why don't I get with you and you tell me what you need? Between Margaret and I'm sure we can get this taken care of." Gavin looked Nicole in the eye for the first time since she approached him in his fit of annoyance and took a small step back. Her eyes were wide and she looked like she would rather be anywhere but there, standing in front of him. Mollified, he snatched a blank notepad off the nearby desk and said, "When you get a minute then, but make it quick," and walked off. Nicole's legs felt somewhat wobbly and she was breathing as if she had run a marathon, but she did as she was asked and followed Gavin to his office after collecting the forgotten weather reports off the floor. No sooner had she settled down in the familiar chair across his desk than there was a shy tap at the door. Gavin sighed and looked up. "Come in." Timidly Margaret poked her head in the door. Oh, sorry. I wanted to, but if you're busy I can." Nicole tried to shoot Gavin a pleading look, but he was looking at Margaret and didn't seem to notice. However, most of his frustration from earlier had apparently burnt off out on the floor, so instead of finishing his tirade of earlier he merely indicated one of the vacant chairs. "This is the type of case that can kill a firm or solidify it. I need you two to make this your only priority. I need you to be available when I need you and able to read my mind and do everything at once. If you can't, then you need to get someone to work with you. Employ the whole bloody office if needs be. Is that clear?" Not much of an improvement, but at least it's there, Nicole thought as she nodded wordlessly. That evening Nicole had the house to herself as Nan and Pop had made plans with some friends to go out to dinner. Nicole called Ryan but was disappointed when she only got to talk to his answering machine. Resolved that she would be spending the evening with the BBC and a bag of popcorn with only the remote as company, she threw on a pair of flannel pajama bottoms and one of the few t-shirts that survived her wardrobe purge and snuggled in on the couch. Getting into British comedy is a lot like getting into the shower in the morning. At first it's kind of uncomfortable because the bathroom is cold, you're still too tired to stand upright, and the water is never the right temperature despite having done the hand test before getting in. After about 5 or 10 minutes, though, you find the shower to be incredibly enjoyable and rue having to get out again. The dry and sometimes very obscure humor of the UK was equally difficult to enjoy at first, but after having abandoned all remembrances of American comedy, Nicole found she was quite able to immerse herself in the Isles' version of slapstick entertainment. Then, thankfully, the telephone rang. "How bored are you?" Gavin's voice responded to her greeting. Nicole hesitated as she guiltily switched off the television. "Could you maybe give me a hint as to what the right answer is?" Gavin chuckled as he answered, "The right answer would be incredibly bored, and I was just sitting here praying my git of a boss would call, begging me to do some menial task because at least that would break up the monotony some." "Wow, I can call you a git?" Nicole asked. "No, but about the rest?" "Sure. What do you need? I've run into a problem with my opening statement and I was hoping to run it past you. Gavin said businesslike. Nicole was stunned for a moment with the idea that he valued her opinion that much before he broke into her good feelings. I need an opinion of a common type person, someone who may have the same knowledge of the average jury member. Oh, all right. Did you want to do this over the phone? Unless you had a better idea that didn't involve me having to put my trousers on. Gavin replied. Nicole rolled her eyes at the well-timed example of British humor. All right. How long is it? Like 10 minutes or an hour. It's about 15 minutes, but there's a lot of gesticulating and air punching that will lose its meaning over the phone. Gavin replied. Nicole couldn't help but laugh. All right, well, you'll have to imagine it then. Do me a favor and read it through once like you would to the jury so I can get the overall idea, then go line by line by line. Yes, ma'am. There was a brief moment of muffled noise, then the distant sound of Gavin clearing his throat before he began. Nicole closed her eyes, trying to get the full image of what he was saying without being able to see his body language and with trying to make sense of some of the off-the-wall British terms that peppered the speech. At the end there was a moment of silence before Gavin spoke again. So, it was really, really good. There were certain points you alluded to that stand out in my head. They raise flags that make me want to hear how you can claim that. Do you know what I mean? I do. Which points are you looking for? Gavin asked. You said something like the defendant's history of harassing and threatening my client is an unavoidable indication of his intentions all along. I want to know what proof you have that the defendant had made threats against the plaintiff's well-being. Also, throughout you painted the defendant as being a blue-collar version of Adolf Hitler. I'm hoping you will present more facts to prove he's done worse than just what he's being brought into court for with this. You don't think that murdering someone is enough to make a person unlikable? Gavin asked skeptically. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that you have to prove for this jury that the defendant acted willfully and that through those actions he caused someone to lose their life. If you can't prove that he did this intentionally this time, then you have to let his past history indicate that it's more probable than not that he would have done this intentionally. Nicole could hear Gavin sigh on the other end. I've known our client for 15 years. His family has been acquainted with mine for generations. I know this isn't something he would fabricate for quick riches. It seems almost lecherous to suggest this, but what about using that humanity in part of your case? It won't do much to prove the facts of the case, but it will lend credence to your client. You're right, it does seem lecherous to fillet my client and leave him wide open in the middle of a courtroom so a jury can poke at his personal qualities and decide if they are valid or not. Gavin replied darkly. Yet you are willing to do that with the defendant? The jury is going to see you going out of your way to air everything about that guy and yet guard your client's personal life, habits, traits, everything. That's going to make them think he has something to hide. There was silence on the other end, where all Nicole could hear was the distant sound of Gavin's radio and the whir of traffic on the road outside her window. Mr. Malon. I'm here. What did you think of me when Jason called the office? Obviously the news that I was dating someone here had gotten around, so, is this a question you really want an answer for? I was using it to make my point. Nicole replied. Well played. Gavin seceded. And with that I'm going to hang up on you because I have a feeling you won't accept this late night chat as an excuse for being late. You continue to amaze me with your astuteness. Gavin quipped. Praise indeed, Caesar. Sunday morning Nicole was listless and bored as she sat on her bed, flicking through channels with nothing interesting enough to grab her attention when an advertisement for Palm Pilots caught her eye. The announcer was going on about how important deadlines and to-do lists would never go forgotten again with the Komodo 3000 or something like then when it hither. She had completely forgotten to abstract the medical expert's deposition. Like a marathon runner on speed, crack and adrenaline, she ran around her room, grabbing car keys, a hair tie and shoes in record time before hauling ass down the stairs and hurtling herself at the front door. Devil got your butt. Grandpa asked calmly from the armchair. I gotta get to the office and finish something for the case before I get fired tomorrow. Nicole cried as she leapt off the porch and raced across the lawn to her car. Have fun. Grandpa replied, turning the page of his newspaper. Enjoying the privilege of being able to park on the street in front of the building, Nicole slammed the parking brake on and scrambled out of the car, thanking the gods of corporate life that Sundays usually found most business types on the golf courses. Hi Stan. Nicole greeted the building's security guard as she drag raced across the lobby. Afternoon, Ms. Duffeck, you're looking very casual today. He good-naturedly replied, taking in her jeans and t-shirt. Yeah, weekend warrior attire. She returned. Could you get the elevator to take me to 4? Sure thing. First things first. Nicole announced as she tossed her bag on her chair, readying her workspace to accommodate her lack of ambition. A minute later, Nicole did a celebratory dance around her desk as she heard the little ding sound on her computer indicating that the download was successful. Happily, she imported her music library into the online system from her iPod and cranked the volume as high as it could go before the music would get distorted. Oblivious to time now that she had Andrea Bocelli, Billy Idol, Paul Motion, and James Hetfield to keep her company, Nicole clacked energetically away at her keyboard. As Aretha Franklin belted out the last few lines of I Will Survive before surrendering the computer-contained stage to Disturbed so they could regale her with Stricken, Nicole was overcome by the feeling that she was being watched. Feeling silly at her overactive imagination, she turned, prepared to see nothing but the empty desks scattered around the room of the nearly dark law office. Instead, she jumped up and let out a yelp as she found Gavin standing behind her. Forgive me, I didn't mean to startle you. I thought that you were perhaps locked in a life or death struggle for control over the radio station with an unseen force. Nicole was so concentrated on trying to gasp a sorry out from around her heart, which had lodged itself in her throat, that she didn't notice the smile Gavin wore. No, I find it fascinating that you can listen to this and still appreciate finer music. What do you mean, listen to this? Nicole asked, her fear all but forgotten in the heat of her passionate desire to defend the music she loved. This is excellent music. It's the result of a natural evolution that has taken years to manifest. The vocalist sounds as if he's choking. Gavin retorted, annoyed at Gavin's flippancy toward the music she loved. She replied coolly, he has an amazing range and he sings with true passion, and he uses his voice in the parts where you say he sounds like he's choking, like an instrument. An instrument? Yes, he uses it like a bass drum to keep the beat. It's a creative way of filling non-lyrical moments as opposed to leaving it to a drum solo or a guitar riff. He'll be out of a job in 5 years. You know, just because you don't enjoy it doesn't mean, I didn't mean it like that. I'm sure they have a very loyal fan base. What I meant was the lead singer is going to destroy his voice if he keeps singing with, such passion. Gavin said, laying a delicate emphasis on the word passion. Not hardly, James Hetfield's been performing for over 20 years, singing with the same sort of gravely pitch. God, when Metallica originally started they were a garage speed metal band. Anyway, he never destroyed his voice because he had a great vocal coach and took care of himself. I would assume this gentleman would be the same way. And this fascinating paradox of musical preference, how did that come about? Nicole shrugged, before responding. Through the better part of the 80s and 90s I shared a room with my sister, who's 5 years older than me, so at an age that is incredibly impressionable I was exposed to all the great hair bands of the time, Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, Duran Duran, none of which ring a bell I suppose. Not really, but the names do lend something to the imagination. So the affinity for heavy metal was a result of sharing a room with an older sibling. How did you come to enjoy listening to Ave Maria? Gavin asked with the same tone he had used when interrogating her after her trial week. Nicole laughed. I think it's appreciation born from envy. At Gavin's quizzical look she continued. When I was in grade school and middle school we had to take an instrument. I opted for the violin. It took about 3 years for me to come to the concrete decision that I had absolutely no musical talent whatsoever. But I couldn't get over how beautiful it was, and I think the fact that I couldn't play or read it made it seem mysterious and unattainable. Typical American dream? Wanting what you can't have. Gavin asked, moving away from the wall for the first time so he was near the corner of her desk. Normally this gesture would have made Nicole feel intimidated, but in this instance, the conversation having reached a level of debate that made her feel elevated above the mundane, she took no notice. I dated a guy in high school who taught himself how to play guitar. I used to love to watch him play, especially when it was just the two of us in his house, no band, no stage lights. His eyes used to get this fire in them and his hands moved like they were going on their own. I knew how much time he spent practicing to get that good, and I knew what it took to play guitar to some extent because of the base knowledge I had from my failed attempts at becoming an orchestral prodigy. Likewise, I knew that he had some talent that not everyone could tap into. Whatever he had, whatever any musician has that gives them the ability to convert blobs on paper into something so masterful, Nicole let the thought drop there, having abruptly come back to reality, the one in which Gavin was staring at her. "Sorry, bit more than you needed to know, who?" she asked, feeling the blood creep into her cheeks. "No, not at all. In fact, it's refreshing to hear someone argue their case so well." "So was that a jab at me or your peers?" Nicole asked embarrassedly. Gavin looked slightly taken aback for a moment before replying, "Neither, actually it was a compliment for you. Thank you for pointing out that I may need to refine my talents somewhat." Nicole tried to think of something gracious to say but found herself suddenly tongue-tied. Gavin, however, did not seem to expect any further conversation as he strode back to his office, pausing only to casually mention, "If that is the abstract from the medical examiner, of course it's not, that's been done for days." Nicole replied theatrically. Gavin shook his head and disappeared into his office. In contrast to the weekend that preceded it, Monday was a nightmare. The date of the nasty wrongful death trial was Tuesday, and all the horrible last-minute things that crop up were coming forth in abundance while the staff commenced their work with all the ire and short-temperedness that possess stage actors the day before opening night. Nicole was leaning awkwardly over Margaret's desk, grappling with a stubbornly non-compliant stapler. "How goes it?" Margaret asked calmly as Nicole attempted to curse the stupid thing off the face of the earth. "Arg. I'm up to my eyeballs in it," Nicole replied, debating the benefits of either prying the jammed staple out of its present position with her teeth or hurling staple and stapler against a nearby wall. The perils of the illustrious job of deposition stapling. "Good thing you're wearing deodorant, love, you're working up quite a sweat there," Sashi offered helpfully as she leaned against a pillar, sipping tea. "Nicole, stop whatever the hell it is you're doing and email me the spreadsheet corrections, and God save your soul if you didn't do the corrections. I needed the sodding thing 5 minutes ago." "If you needed the stupid thing 5 minutes ago, why didn't you ask me for it 10 minutes ago?" Nicole bellowed to Gavin. "Because 10 minutes ago I didn't need it." He spat back. Nicole gritted her teeth and emailed over the spreadsheet Gavin had demanded she send to him before she took her next breath, then took a moment to close her eyes and wish she were on the beach in Cannes. "Oh, you've got guts, haven't you?" Janet asked as she hurried over to Nicole's desk and plopped down an intimidating-looking folder. "I'm centering my chakras before they go berserk and strangle the tyrant," Nicole replied, not looking up. "I hope they're quick then, because to my figuring you've got about another 45 seconds before MT. Gucci erupts again," Janet warned. "With fun like this, who needs concentration camps?" Nicole thought out loud. "That better be some self-motivating mantra you're mumbling," Gavin warned as he stormed past her desk. "Chicken soup for the homicidal soul," Nicole replied. Gavin spun back around and snatched a vacant nearby chair. Startled, Nicole flinched and jumped back a little. Gavin had seen her reaction and visibly relaxed a bit. "Sorry," he mumbled, "but I wanted to speak with you while I had it on my mind." "Oh," Nicole said, concerned. "What about?" "The trial tomorrow. I know you put a lot of time and work into it and I appreciate it, you've done an outstanding job, but, Nicole prompted, picking up his apologetic tone. I need someone who is fluent in British customs and rules to assist with it at trial. It's nothing personal against you, by any means. I just don't think you'll be able to pick up the innuendos of the witnesses or the jury. Nicole could feel her insides shrink a little with each word he said. He never came out right and said she would be assisting him at trial, but apparently they both had been operating under the same impression. Yeah, no, I get it. Thanks for telling me before I showed up at the courthouse, she said, trying to sound nonchalant and easy. So who's going to the show? Gibbons. Gavin replied. Nicole wanted to scream at him. Gibbons had as much experience on this case as she had with fighting kangaroos. He had done nothing more than photocopy a few pages of the file, whereas she had spent countless hours researching issues and staying late just so all of her hard work could be pawed through by that oaf. All right, well, good luck, she said, hoping she sounded cheerful and optimistic. There's a good lass. Thanks for understanding. Nicole shot him a forced smile. Anytime. Git. The office was on eggshells for the next few days, accepting bits of news as it came in from the courthouse as to the status of the trial. At any given time the news was optimistic, somber, despondent, and apathetic. After 3 days of arguments the jury was given their instructions and was sent off to deliberate. The fact that they ended it on a Friday is a killer. If they take longer than 3 hours to debate this, then we have to wait all weekend for the answer. I need a drink, Margaret declared after she hung up with Gavin. You're sounding a bit like Sashi, Nicole noted. Yeah, well, she tends to rub off like moss on a bear's arse. There's an image that deserves to be poked from my mind's eye with a fork. Nicole admitted. Generally though, the longer the deliberation the better, right? Not always. It could be that our side didn't do a good enough job of stating our points, it could be that the other side did just as well as us, or any number of other combinations. A quick verdict could go any way too, she forecasted ambiguously. Lacking its usual Friday vigor, the office members lagged around, seemingly in no hurry to abandon their posts for fear that someone at the courthouse would call and they would miss being on the ground floor of the news. Finally, at 5 minutes past 5 the phone rang and Sashi was nearly trampled as other nearby associates tried to reach for the phone past her. Back. Back, you craven lunatics, she cried, brandishing a message skewer menacingly. Malon, this is Sashi. Oh, Watcher Gavin, what news? Right, all right, I'll let everyone know. Have a good weekend. She replaced the handset and turned to the room at large before announcing flatly, no news yet, the jury are still out. Have a good weekend all. The collective internal groan of the associates and staff was almost tangible as they all filed out of the office and rode the lifts to their respective autos. Nicole stayed behind to finish a document that wasn't due until next Friday because she didn't want to get stuck in the after-work struggle to exit the car park. Just as she flipped her monitor off, the phone rang again. Hello, Malon, it's me, Gavin. I need a favor. Are you the only one there yet? Gavin asked, sounding distracted. Me and the cleaning crew so far as I know. Could you grab the red folder off my desk and have courier run it round to my place? Pay him out of the expense box and leave a note in there to remind me how much it was. I'm leaving work now myself, would you mind if I just ran it over on my way home? It'll save some money. Nicole offered. I can afford the courier, either way, I don't care. Just make sure I get it tonight please. He asked, sounding harried. I will. Right then, bye. Nicole disconnected the call, then dialed the number for the motorbike courier Gavin used frequently. You want a folder delivered where? The wheezy man on the other line asked amusedly. To Kingston Park Place. Nicole repeated, feeling as she was being led into a practical joke. For when? Before 8 tonight would be ideal. You realize, love, this is Friday, don't you? I'm fully aware of the day, sir. I was not aware that you were a calendar though. Nicole replied bitingly. Well then, my cheeky lass, you should be aware that everyone and their bloomin' dog needs their things delivered to them before 8 tonight. Callan in a last minute makes yours the last priority. I can ave a man pick it up but I can't promise nothin' for the delivery time. Might ave to wait till tomorrow. Let me save you the trip then. Nicole snapped, hanging up on the man. Nicole drove to Gavin's home having pulled the address out of his day planner and the directions off the internet map finder. The house was an inviting-looking structure, or at least had the possibility of being one had the gardens not been surrounded by the air of ones that had been neglected and the lawn a little better kept. Climbing the semicircle-shaped stone steps up to the front door, she noted how there was an awkward feeling in her stomach, like the one she got as a child, and she ran into her teacher in the grocery store. It was one thing to see a teacher or a boss at work and company/school related functions, but another entirely to see them in their homes. It was a bit like seeing a penguin in the Sahara, it just didn't fit into her reality. Nicole knocked on the door and stood back, not sure what she should expect to emerge from the other end. She nearly laughed when a 30-something Portuguese woman who was holding a turkey baster opened the door. "Hi, I'm Mr. Malon's assistant. He needed this dropped off," Nicole said, holding the folder out in front of her. "Yes, in the study. I show you where." The woman replied, not taking the folder. Nicole faltered for a moment, weighing out the benefits of being able to tell Sashi and Margaret that she had actually been in Gavin's lair, with the feeling that by going in there was trespassing on his privacy. "I don't touch the papers," the woman explained to Nicole. "You take them to him if he wants them. So it wouldn't really be curiosity then, it would be following orders," Nicole decided as she followed the woman down through the entrance hall and through a wide, well-lit hallway. "In there," the woman said, pointing to a closed door in the middle of the hall. "Oh, thank you," Nicole replied. "Couldn't do the decent thing and announce me or anything, could you?" Nicole thought nervously. Gingerly she reached out and tapped the heavy wood panel of the door a few times. After a moment and without warning, the door swung open. Gavin, who had a phone to his ear, looked startled for a moment when she saw her before indicating for her to come in. Nicole took the opportunity, when his back was turned, to examine him quickly. He was still wearing dress socks and gray slacks but had abandoned his dress shirt and was instead wearing only a white t-shirt. "Can I ask you to hold for a minute?" "Thanks," Gavin said to the unknown person on the other line. He turned to Nicole and said, "Can you wait a moment?" "Yeah, sure," Nicole replied, holding the folder dumbly. "Yes, I'm here," Gavin said to the phone again. Nicole attempted to be polite by looking anywhere but at him, but thought maybe she looked like she was being nosy. Feeling more and more out of place, she was relieved when Gavin walked out of the study, apparently to take the call in a more private area. Unsure of what to do, Nicole resumed her examination of the room and was immediately awestruck by the volumes of books that lined the walls. Some were obviously law books bound with heavy faux leather and labeled with gold leafing. These she glanced at, having recognized a few from the more extensive law library that was kept at the firm. As she perused the shelves, she came across some volumes that were definitely outside the realms of the legal profession. E. Scott Fitzgerald's The Side of Paradise and Ernest Hemingway's In Our Time, sat next to Frederick Douglass' My Bondage and My Freedom and William Faulkner's Pylon. Enraptured by the treasures proudly displayed on the shelves, Nicole became oblivious to her surroundings. "Anything in particular catch your fancy?" Gavin's voice asked calmly. Guiltily, Nicole snatched back her hand that she had placed on the spine of Edgar Allan Poe Volume 1 and turned to see Gavin standing at the desk holding the folder she had abandoned in order to examine his collection. "No, I mean, I wasn't trying to pry," Nicole stammered. "You have a very nice collection," she amended lamely. Gavin smiled patronizingly at her. "Do you enjoy antiquated books or literature in general?" Nicole watched as he set the folder down and perched himself on the edge of the desk, much as a professor would while quizzing a student on a paper that was just turned in. Sheepishly Nicole replied, "Both. Unfortunately though I don't really have the resources to pursue antique books, but I find them fascinating." "Curious, isn't it? You can buy a reprint of Don Quixote, which would be in perfect condition, for a few pounds at any bookstore, but for the first edition, one would have to go to a specialist and pay hundreds of thousands, and that purchase would have suffered water damage, fraying, discoloration or any manner of aging. I kind of wonder if it's because people are drawn to the ones that are closer to the source. Obviously for a book to maintain such popularity and renown it's got to be great, and having the original is the next best thing to meeting the author in person. So you think rare book collectors amass originals to feel closer to the creators? Much in the same way ancient civilizations built pyramids and towers to feel closer to their gods." Nicole felt suddenly very foolish and wished she could leave melt through the cracks in the hardwood floor, but refused to abandon her position without a fight. "It's a valid theory, since we are not as far removed from our predecessors as modern man would like to think. Many of the old traits are still buried in us, a point that sociologists, behaviorists, and philanthropists nowadays are granted gobs of research grant money to study." Gavin looked at her with an amused expression for a moment before stating, "So you are an avid music lover, antiquarian book appreciator, paralegal and psychoanalyst? It's a wonder you're still able to stand, I'd be exhausted." Nicole grinned. "You who runs a very successful law firm, probably attends orchestral concerts, and actually collects antique books. And for all those reasons and more is why I have gray hair," Gavin replied. Nicole laughed. "Oh really? Where?" To her amazement Gavin ran his fingers through the hair on the side of his head and leaned down next to her. "See that? Right there." Out of the corner of his eye Gavin could see Nicole's laughing face as she placed her hand on his shoulder and leaned in to examine the side of his head. Before his mind could go beyond the thought that she had nice eyes, she laughed and declared, "I think you're beginning to go senile because I don't see any gray hairs." "Oh well, there's a comforting thought," Gavin muttered as ran his fingers through his hair again to straighten it. Nicole laughed again, then asked, "How did you become interested in old books?" Gavin raised an eyebrow as he searched the shelves, finally finding what he wanted and pulled it down. "My grandfather's grandfather was in the Queen's Navy in the beginning of the 17th century, and he would gather nautical atlases which were passed down through the generations of my family. When I graduated university he gave me one of them as a gift, and I think that started it." "Find an old book of sea maps." Nicole gazed at the old tome in awe, marveling over the workmanship that was given to the various prints. Waterways were depicted with small rocks to indicate areas of dangerous passage, while ports were illustrated with happy-looking ships bobbing peacefully in tranquil waters. The middle of the ocean showed tentacles of a giant squid, and the banks of South America and Africa showed natives dressed in heathenistic clothing. I was amazed at how the author and illustrator gave precedence to certain areas without using words," Gavin commented as he slowly turned the pages, allowing Nicole time to pore over the diagrams and current flows. "For instance, here, in northern England a castle is drawn in such a way that if it were to scale it would have taken up 3 counties, whereas this one here," he pointed to a puny speck in the lower Irish Isle drawn with the same scale in mind, "could have fit in the first one's master bed chamber." Nicole was about to reply when she heard the hall clock chime the hour. "Oh, wow. I didn't mean to take up so much of your time," Nicole stated. With some degree of self-control she tore her gaze from the open pages of the atlas and looked at Gavin. The courier said they couldn't guarantee they'd be able to bring the folder to you today, which is why I dropped it off. I should probably leave you to it." "Thank you," Gavin replied, closing the book carefully and returning it to its place on the shelf. "Drive carefully. Have a good night," Nicole called as she left. Her hand was actually on the doorknob of the front door when she remembered she wanted to ask him about his decision to remove her from the trial. She faltered for a moment, trying to decide if it was better to embarrass herself or just accept the fact that things are the way they are. Chicken shit. Nicole muttered to herself after deciding to be a coward and leave. "Sorry, missed that," the housekeeper said, appearing out of thin air. "Oh, not, I was talking to myself." "She can sit." Nicole lied. "I just remembered that I forgot to ask Mr. Malon something, so Sashi can sit and wait a bit longer before I go pick her up," Nicole said, rounding off the fabrication nicely. "Okay then." The housekeeper nodded, gesturing for Nicole to go back down the hall. Damn, Nicole thought as she realized she was right back where she started. The door to the study was still open, allowing Nicole to peer in and see if Gavin was back on the phone again. Before she even got to see him, she figured he wasn't on the phone, as she could plainly hear Caruso playing on the radio. Curious, Nicole snuck an unannounced glance around the door and stopped, forgetting completely she was only going to sneak a quick look. Gavin was sitting in the chair that rested along the window, his face only showing a profile, but enough of it for Nicole to know he had his eyes closed. His head was titled back slightly and his lips were barely apart. He looked in raptures. Nicole was amazed that this calm, peaceful man could be the same terrifying individual that roamed the Isles of Molinink. In the fading evening sun his face was light with a soft orange light that made him look younger than his years, but took away none of the dashing good looks or strength that was becoming very familiar. As the orchestra reached the climax, Gavin opened his eyes and saw Nicole in the doorway. "Ms. Duffeck, I have the pleasure again so soon," Gavin said as he stood. Nicole couldn't tell if the redness in his cheeks were due to embarrassment, the warmth of the sun, or anger at her spying on him. I wasn't, trying to, Nicole stuttered idiotically. "Yeah, if that doesn't betray a guilty conscience. At least you missed the part where I conducted the orchestra," Gavin replied. Nicole laughed nervously. "Was there something you needed?" Gavin asked, raising an eyebrow. Sort of, yeah, I guess." Gavin waited patiently. "Good show, make an ass of yourself so he'll forget you were spying on him before," Nicole thought. "I was just wondering. God, it seems stupid now," Nicole started. Gavin was still looking at her expectantly, so she continued, "I was wondering why you didn't want me to assist at the trial. I mean, I know you said it was because Gibbons has more of a feel for British culture, but I was wondering if maybe you were, if there may have been other reasons why you didn't think I was up to it. Do you recall, when I hired you, I told you that because you were not licensed or experienced in the law of the United Kingdom that there would be certain things you could do and things I didn't have confidence in you for?" Nicole nodded mutely, so Gavin continued, "Gibbons has been with my firm for 6 years and was head-hunted from another firm where he worked for 3 years, both of which were in the city. In contrast, you've been in my firm for 3 months and in the city for 3.5. So, this has nothing to do with my arguing with you, yelling at you, or touching your books. You touched my books after I told you that Gibbons was going to be assisting, or do you expect me to be a mind reader?" "Well, no, I just thought, I was being witty, Ms. Duffeck." "Oh. It comes down to simple tactics, something you must have observed in your US law firm. I think that it would be to our case's greater advantage to have someone at trial that's familiar with the lay of the land. Why does it bother you so much anyway? There's no more pay or prestige in assisting at trial." Nicole shrugged. "I practically bled for this case, I lived it for weeks now, and I wanted to see it through." "Is this a matter of pride?" Gavin said, walking over to the radio and turning it down. "No, well, not entirely. The majority of it is that I made this, I found the facts and the clauses and the stipulations, and if it doesn't hold up in court, if it falls, I should be the one there to either fix it or take the blame for it. Margaret put more hours into this case than you have, and she's not here arguing to be the one to assist," Gavin said, flipping open the red file she had brought him. "Do you think she feels less responsibility for this case than you?" "I don't know, I haven't asked her." "Then would you feel better if I had someone assist who had put in as many hours in as you or Margaret?" Gavin asked, looking at the file. Nicole walked towards him and stood nearly at his elbow, trying to catch his eye and divert his attention away from the file so she could watch his facial expressions. Now that she got started, she wanted it finished. "I'm not questioning your choice or doubting that it's right, sir, I only wanted to know if I could have done something better," she said, looking up at him. Gavin looked down, surprised she was standing so close to him, not to mention actively seeking criticism of her work. Gavin turned slightly so he could face her directly and replied, "I've been less than patient with you and everyone that was on this case, and others, yet you've still put forth all the effort and dedication any reasonable attorney would have been pleased with. The mere fact that you're standing here asking why I am not giving you more work to do solidifies my idea that hiring you was going to benefit my firm greatly. There's nothing you could have done better and no mistake was made on your part. Gibbons is a local and I think that will appeal to the jury and the court. That's all." Nicole's mind was buzzing with the words that she had just heard. Gavin was quick to criticize, berate, yell, but not so much with the making of the compliments. "Thank you," she managed, hoping her voice didn't squeak. "You're welcome. Shall I walk you out?" "No, thanks, I've been through there enough to know my way," Nicole replied, smiling. "Very well, have a good evening," Gavin said, smiling back. "Good evening, love, how was work?" Nan greeted Nicole. "All right, the jury is still out on the case though, so, well, just have faith in the truth, I'm sure it will all come out in the end," Nan offered optimistically. "Ryan called, by the way, wanted you to give him a call back." Happy for the distraction, Nicole grabbed the phone and punched in Ryan's number. "Hey, you called?" "Yeah, just wanted to know if maybe you wanted to go catch a movie or something." "Tomorrow," Ryan replied, sounding as if only some of his attention was actually on the phone call. "Yeah, sounds good." After they had clarified the specifics, Nicole asked, "So, how's work?" "It's all right. Things have slowed down some, which is good and bad." "Did that company decide to go with your firm?" Nicole asked, remembering the energy he had spoken with before and hoping maybe talking about it would make him come around. "No, they thought that staying with the firm they were with would be the best thing to do for now, so that was a few hundred wasted man-hours. Couldn't you take a few of your ideas and put a different brand to them?" Nicole asked naively. Ryan sighed, "Not really, because the first company saw all of them, and if it gets around to other prospective clients that we recycle our ideas, it'd be like professional suicide." "Oh," Nicole replied stupidly. "Look, I had a long week, so I'm going to run for now, but I'll see you tomorrow, right?" "Okay, sure. I'll talk to you tomorrow." Feeling as if something was amiss with things between her and Ryan, Nicole decided it was time to evaluate her situation. Lacking a magic mirror that would allow her to see in her own head, she did the next best thing and called home Saturday morning. "Hey Diosa, how's your side of the pond?" "Nikki. How the hell are ya?" "I'm all right, how are things on your end?" "Oh, same old same old. Tell me about England. I got your letters and stuff, but it's not the same as hearing it from you." Nicole spent a good 20 minutes describing the English life in detail to her Western counterpart, sparing few details. "So they really have spotted dick on the menus there?" Jamie concluded in awe. "I thought it was just something they said there to make us feel stupid." "No, it really is a food here. It's a dessert made from currants, which are the spots, and dick, which is the word dough just corrupted. It's really good if you can get past the fact that it's made with mutton fat too." "Well, wonders never cease," Jamie murmured in amazement. "So Han, I have a question for you, and I need you to be brutally and unequivocally honest with me." "Oh, I love these. Fire. Okay. Do you think I'm distant and unapproachable?" "What, in work or personal life?" "Relationship-wise. You see, there's this guy, Ryan? The hunky advertising exec. That's the one. Anyway, I think things are starting to dissolve between us." Nicole explained how Ryan was trying to get her to commit to something, and since her tap dancing routine in response to his direct questioning had been more and more aloof. "Did you tell him about the night?" Jamie asked seriously. "No, why not?" "I dunno. I don't want to be that person, I guess. I don't want to be the victim or Jason's ex-wife or the idiot woman who let her husband use her for batting practice. I want to be me. I know what you're getting at, honey, but that you doesn't exist any longer. You're not a victim, or a batting dummy, but you are Jason's ex-wife, and it is for reasons that are less savory than, say, mutual dislike. Ignoring it won't change it, and hiding it, yes, you are hiding it," Jamie added, hearing Nicole prepare to argue that choice of words. "And in so doing, yes, you are probably being unnecessarily distant and closed off. How could you not be?" Nicole was silent for a long time, mulling this over in her mind, while Jamie, possessed of the inherent knowledge that all women have that states when one person slams another's psychological flaws full into their face they need a moment to consider the depth and honesty it has, allowed her the time to think. "Question for you," Jamie finally asked. "All right." Nicole mumbled, a bit warily. "Do you like him? Aside from looks and financial status and all?" "I'm not sure." "So do you think that your lack of candor with him is a symptom of your possible indifference, or is it the cause?" Nicole twisted the phone cord and pulled her feet up closer to her chest, thinking hard. "You don't need to tell me, but you should at least know yourself," Jamie said quietly. "Hey, handsome." Nicole greeted Ryan outside the movie theater. "Hey yourself," Ryan said, pecking Nicole on the cheek. "How've you been?" "Pretty well, I might be an ant," Nicole said, scanning the list of movies outside the theater to make sure they were on time for their show. "Really? I didn't even know you had siblings," Ryan replied, furrowing his brow. "Yeah, I have a sister, but she's not the one who's pregnant. Jamie's a really good friend. So it would be an honorary aunt thing," Nicole answered, noticing the look on his face. "Have I ever told you about her?" "Nope," Ryan replied, looking at his shoes. Nicole went on to describe Jamie and their years in school together, hoping to dispel the look of, dare she say it, disinterest, on his features. "You know, I think that's the most you've ever told me about yourself," Ryan said after Nicole had finished. "Yeah, sorry, I just don't think I'm that interesting, not compared to big corporate takeovers and superstar-studded premieres," Nicole said by way of an apology. Ryan snorted slightly but said nothing. Is there something wrong?" Nicole asked finally. "Nah, I think I'm just getting burnt out, too much work and whatnot. I'm thinking about taking a holiday to go visit some family in the north, take a couple of weeks and recharge my batteries." "Oh," Nicole said, thinking she was getting the old heave-ho. "Look, it's not like that. Shit, I'm not dumping you. It's just, you know," Ryan said, rubbing his eyes. "Work is stressful as hell, and if I'm in the city I'm surrounded by it. Like that movie poster was done up by my agency, as was that one. And the company that manufactures those sweets is represented by us. I worked on the last commercial. No, I get it, a soul-searching sabbatical, very zen," Nicole replied lightly. "Shall we?" Ryan asked, indicating the theater door. "Movie's about to start." As the theater lights dimmed and the popcorn started to dance across the screen, pirouetting with the goobers, Nicole reached over and gently touched Ryan's hand. In her peripheral vision she could see him start and turn his head, no doubt surprised that she was initiating contact. She felt his pinky lift, allowing her to slide her hand beneath his. "Melt, Ice Queen, melt," Nicole thought hopefully. "We've fallen into a happy little rut, haven't we?" Nicole asked as she and Ryan walked along the street. "What do you mean?" Ryan asked, laughing. "We have a date, you walk me to my car or to the door, it's very nice," Nicole commented, looking up at the sky. "You know, Ryan stopped walking and looked at Nicole. We could change that. Nicole had stopped also and was looking at him. How so? Ryan took a step toward her and then another, closing the distance between them. He brushed the hair off her face and kissed her cheek surreptitiously. You could come with me to my flat. If at all possible, the office was even more on tenterhooks Monday than they were on Friday. Gavin's presence at the firm was seen and felt more than heard, as any sightings of him were usually done in passing nods and hopeful thumbs ups. The man himself seemed too distant to offer much of an intelligent response, instead offering the same non-committal nod for a signature request or a comment on the weather. Nicole made a point to use this opportunity to smother attention on other casework that had gone slightly anemic in the presence of the nasty wrongful death suit. Oi, the woman of the hour. Nicole looked up to see Gibbons gesturing towards her with his teacup. If it weren't for this lass, I don't think the case would have gone half so well. She's got this technique of organizing the trial notebook in such a way that a baboon could follow it like an expert. And the baboon would be you? Sashi asked innocently from the teapot. Gibbons smiled. That's right, love. But baboon or not, I'm the one that got to go to the show. An organ grinder and his chimp. Lovely image. Sashi smiled and walked towards Nicole. So dear, how was your weekend? Shag any good-looking blokes? She shot a withering look that implied Gibbons was not in that particular category. No. Well no. Nicole replied hesitantly, knowing Gibbons was probably lapping up every word. Sashi too seemed to sense the interloper and took Nicole by the elbow, guiding her through the battlefield of the office. You mean to tell me you still haven't become intimately acquainted with Ryan? Nicole looked towards Sashi and locked eyes with Gavin, who was looking at her fleetingly. Nicole flushed and looked away. No, and maybe we could talk about this later? I'm pretty sure half the interns are going to be calling me frigid britches amongst themselves. Better to be frigid britches than britches of the Pong. Sashi muttered. Nicole laughed. Pong? As in the video game Pong? No, love, Pong as in stink Pong. You really are a Yank sometimes, aren't you? She asked, regarding Nicole affectionately. I suppose, Yank meaning American, right? To which Sashi merely rolled her eyes theatrically. So, say you step in dog mess and walk into the office, I would say you're pongy. Nicole asked, enjoying the change of subject. No, you would say I pong. Pongy isn't a word. Like pong is. Nicole replied. You knew one variation of it, so obviously it is a word. Sashi retorted. Yeah, but as a noun, not an adjective. Either way, the question is not to pong or not to pong, the question is to shag or not to shag. Or rather, why you are in the to not shag frame of mind. Something, I'm sure we should be discussing over lunch. Margaret, who had thankfully just appeared next to Nicole, declared solemnly. Thank you. Nicole exclaimed, relieved to have an ally, at last. Oh no, you're not off the hook that easy. I want the details too, starting from what it is you two are talking about. Margaret advised, slinging her purse over her shoulder and jangling her keys ominously. Come on, off with you then. Sashi cried with enough thespian inflection to attract the larger majority of the office to their trio as Nicole, flanked on either side by Sashi and Margaret, trooped off to the bank of elevators. Once outside the office, Nicole reached into her own handbag and produced a pack of cigarettes, nervously shaking one free and lighting it without a glance at her friends. Fags? I thought you only smoked with beer. Margaret noted. A last request before you two frog march me to the gallows. Nicole muttered around the butt. Too right you are. Sashi cried, imitating a very stiff master at arms. My, but aren't we in high spirits today? Nicole commented, hoping to pull some of the attention off herself and direct it on the spotlight-loving Sashi. Nick and I are getting along famously, for now at least. Which, by the way, is a wonderful segue into your drama. Sashi said as she plucked away Nicole's cigarette and pulled a drag. Nicole sighed and watched as a pebble she kicked skittered ahead of her down the wide sidewalk where it bounced off of a freestanding dustbin with a perky pling. You see, Sashi began addressing Margaret. Nicole was given a very nice offer of accompanying her bloke to his flat for the evening for some rough and tumble tween the sheets, an offer which our fair companion had rejected. And you of course want to know why? Margaret said, sounding none too surprised at this. It's my God-given right. Sashi said. Nicole, Margaret said loudly enough to be heard over whatever it was Sashi was going on about, I'm not asking to pry, and I'm sure neither is Sashi. The latter part of this Margaret said while staring darkly at Sashi. You know about Sashi and Nick having problems, and you know my boyfriend and I broke up a while ago. You were nice enough to listen to the both of us and try to help us. We just want to do the same for you. Nicole started ahead, wondering if refusing to talk about it would blow things drastically out of proportion or, worse yet, would cause her to lose the two people who, besides her grandparents, have been the nicest and most understanding she'd met in England. The truth was, upon examination, that she was embarrassed. As a young, mid-twenties woman with no mental or physical problems, she should have been desperate for a panty peel. Instead, at the first hint of sex she turned into an ice cube and nearly ran a marathon to put distance between herself and the gorgeous instigator. Oh well, if she was to be freak she may as well be a confessed one. I was married when I moved here, Nicole began, pausing briefly to allow Sashi to gasp and Margaret to choke. We separated just before I actually left, but the divorce only recently became final. This is like that amputated appendage thing, isn't it? Sashi asked agog, a statement that prompted a very dirty look from Sashi and a resolve in Nicole to keep her mouth shut for the remainder of the lunch. Noticing the response her inquiry elicited, Sashi was quick to explain, no, not like that, I'm being serious. Look, when someone loses a leg or an arm they continue to act as if it's there for long periods afterwards because they still haven't gotten used to life without it. Some even go so far as to attempt to scratch an itch on the missing limb. And it's the same here. The divorce is still so recent that you're still subconsciously thinking you are married to him, and doing anything intimate with another man would seem like infidelity. Margaret and Nicole were both rendered speechless by the sudden display of insightfulness Sashi had just produced and stared at the bemused woman in awe. Sashi, you just very well be a genius. Margaret exclaimed. Ignoring the backhanded compliment, Sashi continued, does that fit, Nicky? Nicole mulled the thought over in her mind for a moment, trying it on for size as one might a shoe before responding. Yeah, in theory. I mean, I didn't sleep with Ryan and the divorce was pretty recent, so, yeah, proximity-wise it's probable. Why'd you and Jason get divorced? Margaret asked, holding open the door for the tiny cafe they had come to frequent. Nicole stopped dead in tracks, her mind caught off guard by the unexpected question. In fairness, she should have known this was going to be asked. No one can say I just got divorced and not have someone ask them why. If you don't want to talk about it, Margaret began, obviously seeing something in Nicole's face that indicated unease. Nicole shook her head and moved in the door, allowing another patron the ability to get out of the cafe, but not before shooting Nicole an impolite look for barring the passage. It's all right, it's not a big deal. Probably not as big of a deal as I've been making it. Nicole replied. We grew apart, according to him. Maybe I was too distant to notice. She shrugged, then continued. He began seeing someone else. That bastard. Sashi said vehemently, causing some of the staff to jump and look in their direction. Margaret waved to them in an apologetic way. Do you mind? She asked Sashi. What? He is a bastard? Sashi replied, unaware of her own lack of decorum. Margaret shook her head, exasperatedly, apparently exhausted already from banging her head against the Sashi wall. Any bloke willing to cheat on his wife deserves to be called every name in the book before getting bludgeoned violently with it. I suppose a threat like that would be enough to keep Nick faithful. Who? Nicole asked, smiling at the image. Absolutely. So what did Ryan say when you turned down his offer? Sashi asked. Oh, not much. He just looked funny for a moment, like he couldn't quite make out what I said. You know that look people sometimes give another person when they weren't paying attention to the whole sentence and now have to answer a question about it. Yeah, the look that says I have no idea what you're talking about but I'm too polite to say so, that's the one. Nicole agreed. The women laughed for a while, trading jokes and anecdotes about situations similar to Nicole's involving said look. It's like those people who yell at the top of their voices when speaking to someone who speaks a foreign language. Margaret said, giggling. As if it'll help the situation. Could you imagine giving the look to Gavin? Sashi speculated. I'd be afraid of getting sued for something. Nicole said dramatically. Oh no, Sashi's converted you to her side? Margaret asked gravely. No, I didn't mean it that way, I rather like Gavin. Nicole said frankly, but I can't imagine him taking kindly to being ignored. I think if it was you who was ignoring him, you'd be able to get away with it? Sashi said knowingly. Startled, Nicole stopped her fork just over salad. What? What are you talking about? Oh, you know very well what I'm talking about. Sashi replied pointedly. All those late-night work sessions together, the tete-a-tete you had with him when he nearly publicly quartered Margaret, you've esteemed yourself in his eyes as the poster child for the Malon firm. Sashi said, sounding pleased. Which, by the way, I don't think I thanked you for coming to my rescue that day. Margaret added warmly. Nicole smiled. Anytime. Though not really, because I was terrified he was going to kill me then and there. So, are you going to sleep with Ryan? Sashi asked, whipping her mouth daintily. I don't know, maybe. Though I can't imagine him asking me again. He's a man, hell ask again. For God's sake, a week after he broke up with me, Colin had actually called at 10 o'clock at night and asked if he could come over one last time. Besides, if you really want to, you can always make the first move. Margaret offered. Upon returning to the office, Nicole promptly ran into Gavin. Any news? She asked. A question as ambiguous as that usually brought about an incredulous look on his part before he'd walk away, leaving the questioner to figure out what they'd done wrong or if he'd even heard them in the first place. Today, however, the only warrant for a question like that was obvious. No, the jury is still out deliberating. He replied wearily. If you would be so kind as to do me a favor, though you are more than a glorified errand runner, I need to ask you to stop at the post office and pick up a few things from the firm's post office box. He said, pulling a small key off a keychain. There's no rush, if you could bring the things in tomorrow that would be fine, just leave the lot on my desk. Sure thing. Nicole replied, taking the key from him before returning to her desk. Nicole hadn't noticed that in taking the key from Gavin her fingers had brushed lightly on his palm, but Gavin had. He rubbed his palms together roughly, thinking he was too old to be ticklish as the goose flesh on his arms receded. The next morning Nicole arrived at work just as Gavin was getting off the elevator. She looked at him confused, and in response he told her the jury came back with a verdict and he was going to the courthouse. Dying to ask 1,000 questions, Nicole restrained herself, saying only, "Good luck." As the elevator door slid shut, hiding the wan smile that he bravely tried to adopt. The office was in a buzz, though one that was both anticipatory and solemn at the same time. Very little work was done, and the work that was done was inconsequential and easily left midway through at a moment's notice. No one wanted to be unavoidably detained when the phone call came in. An hour later the receptionist came out from behind her desk and called attention. A hush that would have done a funeral parlor proud descended on the audience as she gravely assessed them all. In a reserved yet clearly audible voice she announced that Gavin called and said the jury found the defendant not liable. A stunned silence filled the office, then was immediately followed by low murmurs. Their side had lost the case. A half an hour later Gavin returned. Nicole tried to say she was sorry things went the way they did, but she may as well have been trying to talk to a bus. He paid her no attention but instead stalked directly to his office and closed the door with such force the pictures on the outside wall rattled. Nicole's nerves were equally rattled as she stared at his door, wondering what she should do next. Her own words, spoken to Gavin days earlier, came back to her mind. I found the facts and clauses and the stipulations, and if it doesn't hold up in court, if it falls, I should be the one there to either fix it or take the blame for it. So resolved to make good on her word, Nicole made a mental note to make a meeting with Gavin to discuss the case with him. The nerves in her hands and legs were buzzing with trepidation at this prospect, but goddamn if she was going to let this case die without a fight. Nicole had worked through her lunch hour, waving off Sashi and Margaret, who had come to ask her to join them again. I'm right in the middle of this, sorry. Next time, right? Don't overwork yourself, love, no good'll come from beating a dead horse. Nicole thanked her for the advice but paid it no heed. She ignored all the other to-dos that were sent her way and focused on the information she had spread out in front of her, poring over data she had looked over so many times that it was nearly committed to memory. Shortly after lunch, Gavin approached her desk. Though he could not help but notice what it was she was looking at, he made no comment other than to say, I would like you to meet with me in the conference room, please. Nicole felt a rock fall from somewhere in her throat and land with a crashing thud in the pit of her stomach, where it sat heavily, cutting off the circulation to her legs. Upon entering the boardroom, Nicole was surprised to see she wasn't the only one there. Besides herself, Sashi, Margaret, Gibbons, and about 20 other people were seated around the desk. Nervously, Nicole sat down in an unoccupied seat, fearing she had been called in front of all of these people for a bit of public humiliation before she was terminated from her position at Malon Inc. For the benefit of those of you who have not been in the employ of Malon Inc. for long, let me please begin by explaining the purpose for today's meeting. My custom, at the conclusion of a large or important case, is to gather together the associates and people who worked on it and go over the outcome. This is not a fault-finding exercise, and any opinion you have on the circumstances surrounding the verdict will be kept to yourselves until after the meeting has ended, when you can come see me in private. This is not an open forum," he said, addressing the room at large. This was a very difficult case, with everyone giving everything they had and then some on this. I am asking for you to give me one more thing before we put this case to bed. Please write up a short abstract on the case, or what you know of it and why you think the verdict went the way it did. It need not be longer than a page, and I would appreciate if you could have it to me before the week's end. In the meanwhile, I would like to again thank you all for your patience and understanding during the last few weeks. The assembly seemed to respond to some invisible cue and began to stand up, mutter amongst themselves, and make their way to the door. Though the collective room was somber and dull, it was no comparison to the brooding darkness that seemed to have encapsulated Gavin. Nicole, under the guise of waiting politely for the cue to pass her, stood and watched him for a few moments. Part of her wanted to go and speak to him, to assure him he had done everything that could have been done. The other part knew it would sound patronizing and condescending, not to mention useless. Resolved to keep her silence, Nicole fell in behind a mousy brunette and followed her out the door. Gavin stood at the head of the conference table, barely noticing the people walking past him in order to return to work. He did, however, notice that Nicole seemed to have lagged behind and found that for some irrational reason he was hoping she would remain behind. He knew what she would say: "You gave it your best, better luck next time," etc. He also knew it wouldn't change anything. His client lost, he lost, and no amount of euphemisms or unsupported optimism would change that. But he wanted to hear it anyway because, after all, pretty lies are still pretty. When he raised high seas from the papers he had been needlessly shuffling, it was to see Nicole's heels disappearing through the door. "Nicole, I would like to ask you for a favor. Do you have a moment?" Nicole looked at her watch. She was supposed to seeing Ryan tonight for the first time in 2 weeks. "Yes, but I do have plans though for tonight," she replied hesitantly. Gavin nodded. "It will take only a moment." She followed him back to his office. This is by no way an illicit proposition, it is work-related. A client has sent me tickets to a show for tomorrow night and I would appear a cad if I turned them down or didn't attend. However, I am unable to secure a companion for the evening. The woman who usually accompanies me to these functions had a last-minute affair to attend to. You are in no way obligated to agree to this, it will not affect your job or my opinion of you. I would like to know if you would be free to accompany me. He concluded. So this wouldn't be a date? Nicole asked, unable to resist the temptation, against her better judgment. For the first time since she met him he looked flustered. No, he replied, not looking her in the eye. Nicole kept herself from laughing, barely. I'd be happy to accompany you. Will I be getting paid for this? I think that may be construed as prostitution. Gavin quipped. Nicole did laugh this time. However, if you insist, then yes. I don't. Would you like me to meet you there? Even though this is not a date, I will still pick you up. Gavin said, sounding more at ease. They made the arrangements and said their goodbyes. Nicole was driving home when the realization hit her. She didn't freak out when she was in his office. She didn't flinch or want to run or anything. Chalk it up to whatever, maybe she was cured. That evening Nicole told Ryan over dinner about the business arrangement she had made and, as she suspected, he was good-natured about it and joked with her. You know, this is how these office romances begin. The charming boss offers a seemingly innocent proposal and sweeps the attractive young secretary off her feet. Before you know it, you are madly in love with him and him you. Given this much though, have you? Nicole asked. No, but those creeps in Hollywood or Los Angeles or wherever your American films are conceived have definitely given us Europeans the idea that you Yanks are all about that top-end romance stuff. If Gavin has a romantic bone in his body, modern science has yet to find it. So are you trying to tell me I have nothing to worry about? Ryan asked, looking serious. Nicole shifted nervously in her seat at the sudden change in atmosphere. Are you asking if I'm interested in my boss or if I'm interested in you? I'm hoping you're interested in me. Ryan replied. You haven't ever mentioned what your plans are as far as the future. You know, what continent you see yourself on 10 years from now. Nicole took a moment to study the arrangement of pasta on her plate before looking up at Ryan. When I met you, I had been in this country for about a week. And now it's been a bit longer than that and I still know very little about you. He pleaded. There's not that much to know, really. Nicole lied. I lived in Wisconsin up until I came here. I don't have any kids and I hate people that are mean to puppies. Inwardly she cringed, knowing full well she was being evasive in the same ways he had lectured Sashi of being. Ryan smiled, almost as one does when they are being lied to by a young child and are convinced they can catch the deceiver at it. All right then, how long do you think you're going to be in England? Ryan, I love it here, I can't deny that. But it's a big step to take. My whole life, everything I worked the past 25 years on is back in the States. I don't know if I can leave that permanently for a mediocre job and no living situation to call my own. My grandparents are wonderful, but I can only hope for their hospitality for so long before they tire of me. And that's the thing. You have this life back in the States, but you were willing to leave it for an undetermined amount of time and you won't say why. I'm not trying to pry or anything, but I'm kind of worried that you may be here on the lam or something. Nicole laughed. I'm not a fugitive, and since the US and the UK have extradition laws, it would be sort of a silly place to run to. Mike Tyson did it? Ryan returned, warming slightly. He was trying to evade paying child support and was forced to in the end anyway, further proof that running here would be pointless. If you are unwilling to tell me because you don't trust me, that's fine. Ryan leaned back and rubbed his face with his fists. I need something to go on, Nicole. I want to know where I stand with you. Nicole's heart ached, though she noted in a clinical sort of way that it was more because she was upsetting someone she knew as opposed to hurting someone she loved or cared for deeply. I left home because I needed to find myself. As cheesy as that sounds, and yes I know it's cheesy, Nicole added, catching his skeptical look, and not for any reason like I don't trust you, but I don't feel comfortable talking about it yet. It was deeply personal and painful and I haven't worked through it all yet. So as the cheesy plot lines go, you can't be sure where we stand until you work through your past? Ryan asked kindly. Essentially, yes. I enjoy the time we spend together, I love being with you and I don't want to lose that. But right now what we have is all I can offer you. Nicole apologized. See, now that wasn't so hard, was it? Ryan asked, grinning. After dinner Ryan walked with Nicole through the garden park in the downtown area, laughing as she marveled over the elephant plants and hanging vines that decorated the paths. It was a pleasant evening and Nicole felt good wandering aimlessly past the various plants and displays with Ryan holding her hand. As the evening drew to a close Ryan drove her home. Thank you, Nicole said softly from the passenger side. For what? Ryan asked, sounding surprised. You know, for a nice evening and for being you. Despite the romance of the evening, the moonlight that shone through the windshield and the subdued song that was playing out of the car's stereo, something still felt out of place when he kissed her. The kiss was nice, Nicole had to admit as she unlocked the front door and waved goodbye to Ryan as he drove off. She couldn't put her finger on what was missing. It could be that Ryan was not Jason, or that she just hasn't known him long enough to feel that sort of chemistry. She looked around the dark home she shared with her grandparents. She could make out all the assorted knickknacks and furniture by memory more than sight. She knew the turn of the hallway and the gentle decline the kitchen floor made from the foundation settling. She was familiar with the creaks and pops the house made as the pipes ran and the furnace switched on and off. But just like Ryan wasn't Jason, this house wasn't home. Nicole pulled her shoes off and sat on the couch in the dark living room, staring out the window and watching the silent street, lost in thought. The next evening, with some help from her grandmother, she got ready to meet Gavin. She dressed in the typical little black dress, which was short enough to not be eligible as funeral wear but long enough to be acceptable to wear in front of her boss. Her hair was done up with piles of curls pinned to the top of her head, a feat which took close to an hour to accomplish, but, with the help of a few stray curls and strands that were left to tickle the back her neck, she looked as if the style was natural and unforced. Her makeup was simple, but in her grandmother's expertise the little bit that was put on seemed to open her face, lighten it, and accentuate without overpowering. Now, how about some perfume? Nan said, offering a clear bottle filled with yellowish-looking liquid. I never touch the stuff, it gives me a headache. Nicole said, laughing. Suit yourself. Nan replied, dabbing a little of the scent to her own wrists. Well then, my dear, I must declare you finished. Nicole looked at herself in the mirror and found she was pleased with the effects of the last hour's work. When the black Rolls-Royce pulled up in front of the house, Pops elicited a long low whistle followed by a grunt that sounded like Swanky. Then shuffled off to the den to watch the telly. Nicole assumed the chauffeur would have honked the horn, but when there was a knock at the door, Nan opened it to find Gavin standing on the stoop, looking more debonair than ever. Good evening, he greeted Nan. Good evening to you, Nan replied. Nicole's just about ready. She stopped and turned to follow his gaze, which had found Nicole standing just behind Nan. Oh, never mind, she is ready. Nan stepped out of the way and wished Nicole a good time, then went to find Pops. Gavin tilted his head slightly to Nicole. Good evening, he said, smiling lightly. Hello. She knew she probably should have felt shy, but the fact that he was her boss and this was a business arrangement dispelled any butterflies she would have felt while wearing a little dress like that and appearing glamorous, both of which were normally in total contrast to her preference of jeans and a t-shirt. He, on the other hand, looked naturally at ease with himself. Shall we? He asked, extending his arm to her. Now she felt nervous. Not the kind of nervous she got before. Not that he was going to hit her. Yes, she was finally able to label what kind of fear it was. It was the nervous fear that she was going to trip and fall flat on her face or burp or something stupid to make an ass of herself. Gingerly she took his arm and allowed herself to be escorted to the car. She sat on the edge of her seat, not sure of what a proper person should do with themselves while they wait for their companion. Shortly after her, though it felt like a lifetime, Gavin slid into the seat beside her. No sooner was his door closed than a male voice from the front asked, "All set then?" to which Gavin nodded and the car began to glide down the gravel lane and out on the country road. The silence stretched on for at least 5 very uncomfortable minutes while Nicole tried to think of something appropriate to talk about. She wondered if she should restrict her remarks to work, then thought it silly to talk about work when they weren't there. Then her mind went to the intelligence she had once received about Gavin, that he was a workaholic, and thought maybe he would like to talk about it before her mind betrayed her, and thought that maybe it wasn't fair to go off of gossip. Finally Gavin broke the silence himself, saying, "Please, don't take this as an impropriety, but you look very beautiful." Nicole laughed, unable to stop herself. "Thank you. You look very good in a tux." Gavin smiled. "I try." "Nice." Nicole thought. "He wears tuxedos all the time. Nan told you he does a lot with charities." "Christ, he probably owns half a dozen." Out loud she said, "I'm sorry, I should have told you before that I have never worked in the capacity of a professional escort before. Since that is the case, allow me to take a few moments to brief you on what to expect. Since you were kind enough to agree to do this with the understanding that it is for business, I will introduce you as my employee." "Do you want me to call you Mr. Malon?" Nicole asked seriously. "No, I think we can skip the formalities. You may call me Gavin if you don't mind." "Not at all. By the way, when did that officially happen?" "My calling you Gavin?" Gavin sat back in his seat for a moment and regarded the question. "You know, I can't say for sure, maybe when you told me to sod off in your grandparents' house." Nicole blushed but decided it would be redundant to apologize for something Gavin had obviously decided to let go. "Also, since this is a business affair, I believe it would go without saying that these are influential people to my career and the well-being of the firm. I will treat them respect that is deserving of their position, but you know, back home in the States it's illegal to prep a client before they go on the stand, and buddy, you're really towing the line here." Nicole accused lightheartedly, the jitters she had experienced before having been dispelled by Gavin's easy nature. "I suppose it could have been worse." Gavin said to no one in particular. Puzzled Nicole looked at him, then, after a few moments of silence had elapsed, she asked, "What are you talking about?" "Your illusion, it could have been worse. Frankly, I was expecting that if you felt compelled to make one, it was going to be some cliché pretty woman quote. It wouldn't work. Your hair's all wrong to be Richard Gere." Nicole replied matter-of-factly. "Ah, but being as I am a solicitor, it works because of my profession." "Clever." Nicole felt her smile falter a bit as they pulled up in front of the theater, feelingly oddly disappointed that her comfortable conversation with Gavin be cut so short. Chivalrously Gavin took Nicole's hand as she exited the limo. "There seems to be a bit of a chill left in the air," he thought as a slight shiver made his skin tingle. Nicole smiled warmly at him when he placed her hand in the crook of her arm and escorted her in. They were barely inside when a wizened, stooped old woman tottered over to them, dripping in jewelry. "Gavin, dear boy, how have you been?" she asked in a high, frail voice. Nicole stood quietly and respectfully to the side as they pursued the obligatory small talk befitting an occasion such as this before the older woman noticed Nicole was there. "Oh, forgive me, dear, I didn't see you there." "Gavin, where is Jennifer?" "She couldn't make it this evening." Gavin replied kindly. "That is a pity. Are you going to introduce me to your young companion then?" "Mrs. Hinchin, this is my assistant, Ms. Nicole Duffeck. Nicole, this lovely young lady is Evelyn Hinchin, a very generous contributor to many worthy causes." "It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Hinchin." Nicole replied, gently shaking hands with the smiling older woman. "You're an American?" "Yes." "What brings you to this side of the pond?" Nicole gave the spiel of wanting to spend time with her grandparents and expand her career. I was fortunate that my grandmother is acquainted with someone kind enough to hire me on with no experience or credentials for legal work in the United Kingdom. She concluded. So do you enjoy working for Mr. Malon then? Yes, very much so. He's a different sort of supervisor than I had in the United States, but in no way less helpful, especially when explaining the difference of procedure between what's done here and what's done back home. You know, I hear all those stories about young people from the United States being disrespectful and arrogant, but you're doing wonders to dispel that stereotype. She said, tapping Nicole's arm approvingly with her playbill. Nicole flicked a quick glance towards Gavin and saw him nod in approval. The old woman held them a few moments longer, then departed to join her party. After a few more run-ins with Gavin's acquaintances, they made their way to the box seats and settled in for the show. Thank you for attending to my acquaintances with such civility, you performed magnificently. Nicole smilingly replied, shucks, tea was nothin'. As the lights lowered, and the crowd silenced as the orchestra tuned, Nicole heard Gavin chortle before she lost all focus on anything other than the stage. The first half of the performance was magnificent. The theater disappeared from her peripheral vision and her mind became unaware of nothing but the soliloquies and exclamations of the stage. The actors themselves dissolved, leaving behind the characters they were playing in their place, and with this new return to life they loved, cried, schemed, and lamented as passionately now as they must have the first time the play was performed. Had Nicole been able to remember that this was a play and that it must have been performed by these very actors at least 100 times before, she would have been all the more impressed with the realism in which they portrayed their titles. So engrossed was she in the story that when the curtain fell for intermission she felt as if she had woken from a dream only to find that she couldn't remember where she was. If you would excuse me for a moment, I desperately need to stretch my legs. Would you care for a drink? Gavin asked, bringing Nicole to her senses. Nicole politely declined, having decided to spend the intermission reading the playbill. She wondered if having never read the play or even hearing of it before tonight was a blessing or a deficit to appreciating it or any performance. Barely 2 minutes had passed since Gavin had left her before a man approached her, forcing her to abandon her mental debate. I do not believe I have had the pleasure of meeting you before. I'm John Harbringer of Harbringer and Associates. The man greeted her with an extended hand, a genial smile. Accepting his hand, Nicole introduced herself politely. So are you attending the show with Gavin Malon then? He asked easily. I am, yes, he was good enough to invite the evening. Nicole answered. Ah, I see, are you a friend of his or an employee? An employee, I've been with his firm for about 3 months now. How is it that you know Mr. Malon? Oh, Gavin and I go back a ways, we're both in the same business, so our paths have happened to cross on occasion. What sort of work do you perform for him? John asked conversationally. A little bit of everything. My position allows my importance to vary from that of an administrative assistant or a stapler, depending on the day. Sounds like you're getting a bit of a raw deal there. John replied empathetically. Suddenly aware that what she said in humor may not be taken that way by one of Gavin's peers, Nicole hurried to correct her mistake. Oh no, not at all. What I meant was that the job allows a lot of variety. I'm always doing something different, so it never gets dull or monotonous, and the staff and benefits are really great. So you're intelligent and a multitasker. I doubt you're getting paid what you're worth there. John said with a used car salesman-like grin. Nicole laughed, more because she couldn't think of anything to say that wasn't rude to her companion. Thankfully she was saved from this crisis by the reappearance of Gavin. John. Gavin greeted the other man coldly. Gavin, good to see you. I was just getting acquainted with you new associate. Nicole, it was a pleasure meeting you. I hope we have a chance to speak again in the future. Enjoy the rest of the show. Gavin settled into his seat and maintained a stony silence. Concerned she had made some unforgivable trespass, Nicole swallowed her fear and asked, should I have not spoken to him? Had I the choice, I would have preferred you didn't. Gavin replied somberly. I'm sorry, it's just that since you told me some of your colleagues and peers would be here I didn't think much of Mr. Harbringer speaking with me. That was my mistake. Like anyone else I have my professional enemies. John is obviously one of them. So he was talking to me to annoy you. No, he was talking to you as a headhunter. Gavin replied moodily. Why though? It's not like I'm a key player for your firm or anything. Essentially I'm expendable, you could easily replace me with the paperboy. That is not the point. The point is any associate he can steal from my firm is an inconvenience to me, thus a win in his favor. Nicole couldn't figure out why, but the fact that he didn't defend her usefulness, even though in this case there didn't appear to be much. Also there was that niggling feeling in the back of her mind that Gavin was now regretting having asked her to the theater in the first place. Sullen, she allowed the conversation to lapse into nothingness, stealing a quick glance at Gavin once more to see what his facial expression might reveal, but it was stony and impassive. She figured he was lost in thought and decided to let him be. The lights flickered, signaling the end of intermission, and she settled back into her seat to watch the rest of the show. The lights lowered and the orchestra queued up again. Just as the curtain was beginning to raise, Gavin leaned over to her and whispered, "The paperboy is a useless prat, he'd hardly be able to do your job." Nicole smiled and enjoyed the show. "You looked as if you enjoyed that," Gavin said as they walked out to the car. "I did," Nicole exclaimed. The way that unrequited love can cause a person to take such drastic measures, the obsessive nature of such a compelling emotion, and the abhorrent shallowness of people in general, it's a timeless story. And the actors were amazing. I love how, even though Christine made a mistake partway through the third act, checked going like it didn't happen, and how Mephisto was able to incorporate his next line to fit around it. It shows real versatility and wonderful. What?" Nicole asked as Gavin was laughing and shaking his head. "I was just wondering if you are a seasoned playgoer or if this was your first." Nicole blushed at her over-the-top review of the performance. "Sorry, it was my first," she replied much more soberly than her previous outpouring. "Don't apologize, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It makes me feel better about not paying you for this," he said, grinning at her. "Would you care to join me for something to eat?" he asked lightly. "Definitely." They drove to a quaint restaurant and ate dinner, discussing nothing and everything when Nicole asked, "So is Jennifer a friend of yours?" Gavin was quiet for a moment, his eyes squinted as if he were weighing the question and the merits of answering it. Still looking in the distance, he replied, "No, not really. She is my ex-wife's sister." Before she could ask more about it, he continued, "I'm not ashamed of it, I just prefer to not talk about it." Nicole nodded, and though they continued to fill the rest of their time at the dinner with conversation, it didn't carry the same warmth as before. The evening wrapped up and he took her home, bade her good night and pulled away. Nicole let herself in and went upstairs, still mulling over the thoughts that Gavin was emotional enough at one point to have had a wife and human enough to have wound up divorced. It was seriously intriguing. Ryan called her on Sunday and asked how the play was. Having gushed out most of her fervor last night, the recap he was subjected to was more abridged and calmer. "The things I learn. I didn't know you were a woman of culture," he said, sounding amused. "Honey, you ain't seen nothing yet," she replied playfully. "So are you busy today?" "Yeah, I've got this deal out of town that needs me to be there, but as soon as I get back I'll give you a ring." Feeling somewhat disappointed that she wouldn't see him in the known future, Nicole let him say goodbye. Rather than wandering aimlessly through the house that day, she decided to ring Margaret. On Monday a mass email was sent out letting everyone at Malon Inc. know there was going to be a benefit ball and they were all invited, and, as when there is any social function on the horizon, giving permission for people to make plans, secure dates, and get gussied up. An excited buzz fell over the floor and associates could be found emailing each other in a zealous frenzy to know what others were going to do by way of dress, escorts, etc. Groups of women would loiter in the break room or in the loo, going over their ideas and making comments of either a belittling nature aimed at those they didn't like or swooning over the prospect of being asked by one of the cuter associates of the opposite sex. The men were a little less outwardly frantic, opting to roll their eyes at what they perceived to be the silliness that the females were displaying while secretly listening to hear if theirs was a name that passed as acceptable or deplorable. "So, are we going to see you come in on Ryan's arm?" Sashi asked, having firmly seated herself on the edge of Nicole's desk. Nicole smiled. "I hope so. It depends on what's going on with his job, I suppose. You know, this whole scene bears a strong resemblance to that of your Yanks prom night," Sashi observed surreptitiously while examining her nails. "And you know this how?" Nicole asked whimsically. "Oh come on, entire movies have been made with proms as the central plot line, or at least a part of the main plot if not the climax. Movies are misleading," Nicole replied. "Sure they are. Well, if one were to take movies as fact, one would have to note that proms are often when young loves engage in performing the nasty for the first time. Oh, very adult. And pray, what relevance does this hold on the revolution of the world?" "Oh, nothing really, except I am wondering if the night of our princess ball will be the night she beds down with her prince," Sashi answered. "While I am well aware of the fact that the upcoming fundraiser has caused a lot of excitement amongst my esteemed employees, I must beg you to please focus a respectable amount of attention on the tasks for which I pay you," Gavin said. At the sudden sight of him, Nicole blushed furiously, wondering how much of Sashi's prying he had overheard. "Right you are," Sashi proclaimed, hopping off her perch and moving at a high rate of speed in an attempt to look the role of the model employee. Nicole made a mental note to murder her later, filing it under B for Benedict Arnold. Ruefully, Nicole was forced to turn her eyes from the now vanished Sashi to Gavin, who had not moved, unfortunately. Due to poor calculation, her eyes instantly met his, causing an uncomfortable squeamish feeling to take hold of her stomach. She watched as he opened his mouth in what she assumed was preparation for a well-deserved reprimand. She was surprised and unsure if his closing his lips together without saying anything and leaving was a good sign or not. Deciding to take it as a good one for fear of what the other option meant, she turned her attention full force to her work and didn't look up again until it was time to go home. When Nicole got home, she called Ryan and asked him if he would accompany her. There was a long silence before he finally spoke. "I don't think we should see each other anymore," he said. Nicole was stunned. "What? Why? I just don't think we want the same things. I'm looking for a serious relationship and I'm not getting from you that you are looking for that. We've been seeing each other for 3 months and you still seem so standoffish with me. You don't know how long you are going to be in England. I just don't see us going anywhere. Ryan, I know I've seemed standoffish with you, and no, I don't know how long I'm going to be in Europe. Well, the last time we discussed our relationship you didn't seem to mind where things stood. I know, but you can't hold me for that for all of eternity. 2 weeks hardly constitutes an eternity," Nicole interjected heatedly. Calming herself, she began again. "Look, I know I've been difficult, I know I've done some things, like not go with you to your place." Now it was Ryan's turn to interrupt her. "It's not the sex, Nicole. It's that I know you don't trust me, but I don't know why. You won't let me in." Nicole sighed. Maybe it was time to let him know. After all, what did she have to lose? "I left the US and came here because I just got out of a bad relationship. No, I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I don't know if this is where I want to live or if I'm going to go back to the States," she said, intending it to be the beginning of her great soul revelation. "I can't base my life on that, Nicole. I'm sorry. I've been dating someone else and we just got engaged yesterday." Nicole froze. The rest of what she had been planning to say wilted and fell from her mind like quick dying flower petals. This couldn't be right. Did he just say had been dating someone else? Another woman? How long? "We've been together for just over a year. She was going to school at Cambridge and just graduated." He was saying this so nonchalantly it was like he was explaining the weather. And you didn't tell me? Did you tell her? Nicole was trying to control her voice so she wasn't yelling at him. No, I didn't tell either of you. I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew I wanted to settle down, I was just waiting to find the right person. April is ready to get married and I love her. I'm sorry, I've gotta run. Ryan said before hanging up the phone. Nicole sat staring at the phone for an indeterminate amount of time before deciding this was one of those things best dealt with in the solitude of her bedroom. After an hour of feeling wretchedly sorry for herself, the phone rang. She had no assumption that it would be Ryan, but she did hope it was someone that she could rope into her sorrow. After all, misery loves company. Watcher, Nikki. What are you doing tonight? Margaret greeted her. I'm planning on having a nervous breakdown. From about 5 p.m. tonight until 3 of the day after tomorrow I will be rocking back and forth in the corner mumbling to myself and petting a slipper. Don't mind the drool though, that's just there for ambience. Wow, sounds serious. Her friend exclaimed empathetically. Is this something you'd like to discuss over a pint or, no, beer is good. Which pub? Nicole agreed hurriedly. In less than a minute the time and place was decided upon and, after hanging up with Margaret, Nicole quickly dialed Sashi's number. Hello. I need you and beer. Flannies in a half an hour. I missed you too. Sashi replied and hung up. Nicole took this as a yes and got herself presentable. This took some work, well actually a lot of work, falling just short of shell-lacking. Although she was pretty liberal with the concealer. 30 minutes later Nicole arrived to the pub and promptly made her way to the nearest bartender to order her drink. In short order Sashi showed up with Nick, whom she sent to play billiards with some other guys before he had a chance to be introduced. To the credit of his species' survival instinct he agreed without complaint and was kept happy by drinking ale and scratching himself in public. So how's this for tea and sympathy? Sashi asked, handing Nicole a companion for her first drink. Brilliant. Nicole replied, sitting down darkly at a high-top table. So what happened? Sashi asked, stirring a pink-colored drink that looked oddly sinister. I don't want to have to relieve the agony 2 more times, so if you're okay with me being bitchy without explanation I'd rather just wait until she gets here. Sashi asked, nodding her head toward the door that Margaret just entered. Exactly. How far ahead of me is everyone? Margaret asked, setting down her purse. Just started. Run up to the bar and get your drink so she can tell us what the crisis is. Sashi instructed. Margaret looked guiltily at Nicole for a moment before saying, is it serious? Confused Nicole replied, depends on what your definition of serious is. Either way I suppose serious is a relative term, so, Nicole stopped because Margaret was shaking her head. I mean, well, that is to say, Margaret stammered. Oh man, don't tell me you have a crisis too. Nicole bleated. No, nothing like that. It's just that, well, I didn't know that you were having a serious thing. Why? What did you do? Nicole accused. Well, I asked Rowan to join us. Margaret replied, biting her lip. That zookeeper you met the other week. Margaret nodded mutely for the first time in what felt like days. Nicole was overcome with laughter. You really think I'm going to be mad at you for getting your funk on tonight? Well, Margaret replied abashedly. Bring em on. Nicole exclaimed. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a little part of her conscious that hadn't had a go at the booze now flooding her cerebral cortex whispered, you're halfway drunk, maybe you, hiccup. Well, if you're sure it's okay. Either way he isn't here yet and may not even show up, so why don't you tell us what's going on? Nicole related the whole of the sad phone call to her sympathetic friends who, at proper moments, either replied with what an arse, or the bollocks of that shite. And other colorful phrases that Nicole wished she could remember but for some reason couldn't. So here we are. Nicole sighed, leaning on the table and trying to figure out if it was the bottom of her fourth or fifth glass she was looking at. I need another drink. Allow me. What are you drinking this evening? Rowan had appeared behind Margaret and was looking as kind and tanned as ever. Rowan, right? How's the kimono dragon? Nicole asked, trying to sound intelligent. Silky and light. Coffee then. Rowan replied. It took Nicole a moment to realize she had mispronounced the species name, and, when the knowledge finally had reached her brain, she didn't have enough intelligence left to care. Instead, she made her way clumsily to the bar and ordered another drink. As she waited for the barkeep to bring it to her, she shook out a cigarette. Here, let me get that for you. Nicole turned to see Rowan standing next to her, holding a lit lighter. As Nicole puffed to ignite the tip of her smoke, he spoke. I'm sorry if I insulted you, I really didn't mean to. No, I'm good. Nicole answered, wishing her throat wasn't so numb from the booze to keep her from feeling the smoke in her lungs. Margaret told me you were having a bit of guy trouble. Nicole smiled at Rowan. You seem like a nice bloke, and also don't take this wrong. I hate men. You're all evil and rude. No amount of apologizing or insulting or drink buying is going to change that. I think you may be an exception to the stereotype, but I don't want to be proven right at the moment, so you can feel free to offend me all you want, at least until my hangover wears off. Nicole saluted him with her tumbler and waited for a response. All right then. Well, since that's settled, I think well, it'll be over there. Rowan said, indicating some non-existent point in space. Nicole watched as Rowan walked off to join Margaret, who seemed glad to have him back. Nicole titled her head a little and caught a glimpse of Sashi and Nick leaning into each other, sharing a quick whisper and a tiny kiss before Nick took up his cue and returned to his game. Nicole sighed and turned her chair back to the bar. A selfish person would be jealous and lonely, whereas a good-humored, decent friend would be happy that her friends were happy and in love. So what? I'm selfish. Nicole thought as she watched the trivia questions pop on and off the wall-mounted TV screen. You know, the real problem, wish the world ash know it ish at noon's got time for nothing anymore. Nicole said to a fellow drunk. 5 minutes ago they were complete strangers. Now, a few too many later and a new segment of yet another murder taking place on the other side of town, they were the best of friends and bosom philosophers. I know. Ish all bout get into the ish and get into that faster than the next guy. And for what? What? I dunno. Nothin'. We're all of us hurryin' to nothin'. The drunk woman swayed a little. I gotta pee. You do that. Take your time. Nicole said, standing, a move that proved to be ill-advised as she stumbled, overcorrected, and pitched into another patron. How are you? Nicole jumped at the familiar voice. Fine. She must have slurred because Gavin looked at her funny. About ready to go then? Where? Some place where you won't get arrested would be a start. That explained the funny look. He was disgusted by her acting like a lush. Nicole didn't want to go with him, she didn't want to be lectured, but she didn't want to force Margaret and her new friend to leave when they just started to look comfy. She tottered over to Margaret and asked her if she could speak to her for a minute. Margaret looked guilty as she followed Nicole to the other side. I'm sorry for ignoring you. I know you needed someone to talk to after Ryan acted like such a blackguard and I bailed on you to talk to Rowan. She stopped gushing her apologies when Nicole raised a hand to halt her. I'm not upset with you. I just wanted to let you know Gavin is here. Nicole paused to hiccup. Why is he here? Margaret asked, throwing a furtive look over towards Gavin. Nicole was silent for a moment. Dunno. I didn't think to ask. Anyway, he offered to give me a ride home though. I wanted to know if you were okay with your guy or if you needed an excuse to bail. Nicole was trying to concentrate on bringing Margaret's heads back into focus and nearly fell over, so she gave up. I can leave if you want. She didn't sound like she wanted to go. Nope, just wanted to offer you an escape route if you needed it. No. I'm okay with him. Margaret said, looking shy. All right then, I'm going home then. Nicole said unevenly. Margaret offered to help her to the door, but Nicole declined, not wanting to look stupid. That would have been better though, as she stumbled into an unoccupied table. Suddenly Gavin was at her elbow. All right then, here we go, he said, taking her around the waist and escorting her out the door. I'm fine, she said, to no one in particular. It's not really you I'm worried about at this point as much as the tables and unsuspecting bystanders, he assured her. You know, you're pretty good at this, Nicole said as he braced her uneven weight so she wouldn't tumble over. I needed a contingency plan if being a lawyer didn't work out. I spent many years of my college life practicing to be a bouncer. Nicole tried to look at his face but discovered it was too far away and gave up. He helped her into the car and closed the door after making sure nothing of hers was going to get pinched by it. After climbing into the driver's side, Nicole started her rant about how the English drive on the wrong side of the road. To his credit, Alan feigned interest. Where are you taking me? Nicole asked as she gazed blearily out the window. My house. I don't think it would be a very good idea to bring you to your grandparents right now, Gavin replied, concentrating on the road. Let me assure you my intentions are honest, he added. Nicole started to giggle and couldn't stop. And the comedy in that is. You sound like the hero from a Jane Austen novel, complete with the accent and debonair, whatever, she concluded with a wave of her hand. I'll take that as a compliment, Gavin advised matter-of-factly. You do that, Nicole said, which started another giggle fit. It must have taken longer than what the ride felt like, but to Nicole's perception they pulled up to Gavin's house in a matter of minutes. Coffee, Gavin announced once they were in the brightly lit kitchen. Chair, Nicole replied, settling in at the kitchen table. Gavin turned and looked at her over his shoulder and regarded her with a bemused look before turning back to the business of brewing coffee. Does this really work to sober someone up, or is that an old wives' tale? I'm not sure. The caffeine should speed the alcohol through your system, but if not, at least it gives us something to do while we wait for you to either sober up or pass out, Gavin said. You're so thoughtful. They sat and drank their coffee in silence for a few moments before Gavin broke the quiet. So would you mind explaining why you decided to get falling down drunk tonight? Maybe I'm a lush, Nicole said into her mug. I highly doubt that. You don't seem the type, Gavin replied smoothly. Is that so? What type do I seem like? Like the type that would have a reason, he said, refusing to be sidetracked. Nicole sighed. She didn't want him to know how deplorable she was, how insecure she felt, or how obvious it was that she had no idea who she was or what she wanted to do with her life, now that her life was something that was apparently at the mercy of fate or apathy. On the other hand, she wanted to hear it from someone else. Maybe it was masochism, or maybe she just wanted someone to know. It was all very confusing, and she felt she was still too drunk to make sense of it on her own. The guy I've been seeing here, Ryan, told me he got engaged to the woman he's been seeing for about a year, Nicole replied. I see. Did you know he was seeing her? No. I'm not that low on self-respect that I would date someone who isn't available, Nicole retorted heatedly. In the process of making her point, she made to stand, but the floor wasn't cooperating with her. So he told you today? Settling back into her chair, Nicole answered, yeah, I called and asked him if he wanted to go to that benefit next month. He told me he was looking for a more serious relationship than what I seemed to be wanting, and his other girlfriend was looking for it too. So, that's where that is. Nicole looked up and watched Gavin get up and walk over to the coffee maker and pour another cup. He didn't return but stood next to the counter sipping. Nicole took it as a hint and started to stand, saying, I feel better, I should go. This turned out to be a bad idea, as the buzz that had been receding regrouped and attacked her full force as she got to her feet. Easy, Why don't you give it a few more minutes? Gavin said as he caught her by the shoulders and steadied her so she wouldn't land spread eagle on the tabletop. Maybe it was the booze, maybe it was that she felt emotionally drained and he was being nice to her, maybe it was the angle that Venus was making with the moon. Whatever the reason, it suddenly seemed like a good idea to Nicole to lean into him and bury her face in his chest. Gavin stood frozen for a moment, his brain jarred to a sudden halt as he felt her fingers clutch at the fabric of his shirt along his ribs. He turned his head a bit to look down at her and inhaled, preparing to say something but forgot what it was he wanted to say as he smelled the scent of her hair. On their own volition his hands moved down, his arms folded around her back, holding her gently. He was afraid to breathe, afraid to move. All that processed in his brain was the feeling of her body shaking slightly with quiet sobs, the way her hair brushed his fingers, and the feeling of warmth her body created against his. Gavin had no idea what was happening. Resigned to whatever it was that he was feeling, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, hoping it would go away. As if in answer to his prayer, Nicole pulled away from him, leaving the place where she had leaned on him feeling suddenly cold. His brain regained control of his arms again and used this opportunity to lower them and stuff his hands in his pockets quickly before they could do anything else stupid. Hoping the worst was over, he looked into her upturned face and had to fight the urge to pull her back into his embrace when he saw her tear-stained face. He had a feeling that this, whatever was upsetting her, went beyond the way Ryan had treated her, but he felt it wasn't his place to ask. Nicole wiped her eyes on her shirt sleeve before saying, "I'm sorry, this is the last thing you need, I'm sure." "It's all right," Gavin replied, sounding standoffish. "I should go before I make a bigger ass of myself than I've already done," Nicole said, moving to grab her jacket. "What makes you think you've made an ass of yourself?" Gavin asked in an attempt to stall her. Nicole laughed a watery laugh. "I can't make a marriage work, I can't figure out what I'm doing with myself, I can't even figure out that a guy isn't really who I thought he was. I came here to get away from the stigma of being a victim, and I keep putting myself into a position that not only proves I'm a victim but gives me new and exciting opportunities as one." Gavin fought off the urge again to hold her and kept his voice level and low. "You're not a victim. You went through something no one should have to go through and it changed you. You're still the same person you were before, only now your view of the world and what you want out of it has altered. And as far as setting yourself up to be victimized, that's just not true. You had bad luck with one man. I can't say it won't happen again, but at least you had enough presence of mind to walk away from it and not try to hold on to something that wasn't right for you. How could a guy like you have gotten a divorce? She must have been insane," Nicole said honestly. For a moment Gavin looked taken aback but regained his composure almost instantly. "Same old story, I suppose. I was busy at the office and didn't spend as much time with her as I should have. She felt I was taking her for granted, that I was more concerned with my professional life than my personal life. I kept telling her I was doing this to make our lives better for us, so we would be able to enjoy." Gavin rolled his eyes. "Either way, she found someone that paid attention to her and left me a few months later." "I'm sorry," Nicole said soberly. Gavin shrugged and turned away to rinse out his coffee mug. "My father died a few months ago. I got the call when I was at work. I went home early and found my husband cheating on me with another woman. I said some really nasty things to him. I don't even remember what it was, but I know it pissed him off. He never hit me before. I always thought he was the kind of guy that was too good to do that. Turned out he wasn't." Gavin moved to take his hands out of his pockets but seemed to think better of it and crammed him down deeper. "I'm sorry," he said kindly. Nicole shook her head. "It's okay." "No, it isn't." "Whatever you said," it was Gavin's turn to shake his head, "whatever happened, you didn't deserve to be treated that way." A few moments passed where neither said anything to the other when finally Nicole broke it. "Thanks for looking after me tonight, I think I'm good to go home now." Gavin regarded her then nodded. The drive home was quiet, Nicole felt no need to share any more with him than she already had, and Gavin was lost in his own thoughts. It felt as if they were feeling the same thing, thinking the same thing, and they appreciated each other's feelings and in that left each other alone to feel as they would feel. 20 minutes later they drove down the gravel driveway and Nicole listened to the plink-plink as the pebbles hit the undercarriage of the car, thinking how nice it was that no matter what at least that sound was always a given. After parking the car, Gavin got out and opened Nicole's door for her in a gesture that made Nicole both pleased and embarrassed. "Thank you. I assure you, Ms. Duffeck, my Jane Austen-like manners are too deeply ingrained in me to be forgotten, no matter the hour." Nicole laughed. "No, well yeah, that too, but, well, thank you for everything, the job, not firing me for yelling at you, listening to my drunken ramblings." "You're welcome. I hope you feel better." "I do." Nicole smiled at him. "And now I'm going to go to bed and sleep until 4 in the afternoon." Nicole let herself in the house and crept up the stairs to the dark sanctuary of her bedroom. Though she was exhausted, drained both mentally and physically, her brain seemed to be running in overdrive. As she readied herself for bed, popping a few aspirin and downing an extra glass of water in hopes of staving off a massive hangover, she looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red, slightly puffy from crying, her hair was somewhat disheveled and her clothes looked like she had been wearing them all day. But she was standing straight, not hunched over like she was trying to protect herself from a blow. And though her eyes bore the unmistakable characteristics of a person who just got done bawling, she couldn't find the haunted look she had seen in them a few months ago. Though she didn't sleep until 4 that afternoon, she made a valiant effort. Nicole got out of bed at 1 in the afternoon and stumbled downstairs, stiff from sleeping so long and disorientated from waking up so late. "What happened to you?" Pops asked from the kitchen table. Nan looked up inquiringly. "I went out last night and had a few too many," Nicole replied, settling in at the table next to Pops. "Is something wrong?" Nan asked, concerned. Nicole went through the story of Ryan and explained that Gavin picked her up from the bar. "I can't believe what a cad he's turned out to be. He seemed like such a nice young man," Nan exclaimed. "That's all right," Nicole responded. "It just wasn't meant to be, apparently." Nan was silent for a few moments, apparently considering saying something but seemed to abandon the idea. She sighed, then said, "I wonder what Gavin was doing at the pub. He usually doesn't go out and drink." Nicole shrugged. She hadn't given that any thought, though now that she was thinking about the previous evening with Gavin she became a little concerned. She couldn't remember everything that happened, only a few snatches. She had the cloudy memory that made her think she hugged him and cried on his shirt. She shivered, hoping it was only an alcohol-induced hallucination. "Here," Pop said, shoving a large mug of steaming coffee at her. "This'll get rid of whatever's left in your system. After you've finished that, come out and help me in the yard." "What good'll that do?" Nicole asked, sipping her coffee while scowling at the idea of a loud, sharp-bladed machine roaring past her sensitive ears. "Teach you not to drink so darn much," Pops replied, pushing back his chair. The smell of freshly cut grass tickled Nicole's nose, causing her to sneeze, an act that made her head feel as if her brain were acting as a battering ram on the inside of her cranium. "When you were a kid you used to love the smell of the yard after I mowed it," Grandpa commented as Nicole wiped her nose on her sleeve for the 100th time. "Just because I can't see through my allergies doesn't mean I don't like it," Nicole answered. Grandpa leaned on his rake and regarded her silently for a long few moments. Concerned she had offended him somehow, Nicole racked her brain for something to fill the silence. "You know," Grandpa started, sparing her the dilemma, "your father was a good man." Nicole was stunned into keeping her silence. Grandpa didn't seem to notice as he continued, as if she was staring at him like a suffocating fish. "He was brilliant, no doubt about that. He knew things I didn't think a person without a PhD would know. But he was an idiot when it came to emotions." Now he turned and looked Nicole straight in the eye. "You know what I mean." Mutely Nicole shook her head. Her brain was frozen as was her mouth, half because her grandfather was speaking to her so candidly about the man she thought he hated and half because she didn't know what the right answer would be to such a statement. Grandparents were supposed to be old school and expect anyone younger than 60 to treat their elders with all the respect befitting a king. Grandpa nodded and continued as if she agreed with him, yeah, the man could explain quantum physics to a duck, but if he had to try and understand why his wife was upset that he worked late hours, well, he just didn't get it. He thought that she should understand that he was trying to make their lives better by bringing in more money so they could live more comfortably. He didn't understand that what she needed, what you both needed, was to have him there, not just his money. So, him cheating on her, where'd that come into play? Nicole asked. Can't fight with someone constantly and not feel like there's something missing from the relationship, something that you want bad enough to go and find in some other woman's bed. Nicole stared off into space for a long time while Pops went back to racking up the grass clippings. Pops, I don't get it. Am I the other woman or the one who pushed Ryan to be with the other woman? Pops turned and smiled at her. Neither, that wasn't the point of the story. The point was that no matter how good a man is, no matter how wonderful the woman is, if the relationship's not right then it's just not right. Nicole smiled weakly and returned her attention to the deploringly small amount of work she had done. Pausing once again though, she looked at Pops. You and Nan fight almost constantly, how come you're still together? Pops leaned on his rake again and looked at her closely. What we do isn't fighting, we bicker and squabble and pick at each other, but we don't fight. Your Nan knows I love and respect her, and I know she loves and cherishes me. It's when those two things are questioned that problems happen. I don't think love like that exists anymore. Nicole moaned. Sure it does. You just have to be willing to wait for it. Pops said. As a signal to the end of the conversation, he began whistling an upbeat sea shanty. On Monday, Gavin arrived to the office earlier than anyone else as he normally did and started going through his calendar for the day, making sure he knew what meetings and court dates needed his presence and what documents were getting close to being due. He also needed to decide what he was going to do about Nicole. She had done nothing wrong the other night except maybe drink too much, but who hadn't done that on occasion? She didn't make any indecent overtures toward him, she hadn't even gotten sick. So why did he want to her stop working for him? The answer was there, he just had to stop blocking it out. Gavin gazed out the window to the beautiful English morning that was breaking over the buildings. He watched a group of children, complete with school bags, walk up the street presumably towards school. Rubbing his eyes, he willed himself to stop being distracted and pay attention to what his brain had been screaming at him since Friday night. I've fallen in love with her, he said out loud to the empty room. This was terrible. Not only was he nearly half her age, but he was her employer. He had an obligation to his company, the legacy he built with his own hands and his good reputation, to not allow personal matters jeopardize professionalism. He had a duty to himself to not damage his company's security. She didn't do anything wrong though. It was him. He couldn't fire her because he had feelings for her. His conclusion didn't make him feel any better, but at least he finally decided there was nothing he could do but ignore how he felt. Just before 8 there was a knock on his door. Apparently his insides didn't get the message from his brain that they were to ignore any emotions he had for Nicole, because his heart did a flying somersault as she entered the office with a notepad and pen. Good morning, she said breezily as she settled into the chair in front of his desk. Gavin watched wordlessly as she smoothed her gray skirt over her knees and tried to remember what it was he had called her into his office for. Gavin, she asked gently, reminding him that he had been silent for too long. Nicole left his office preoccupied herself. She was hoping to have gone back to work as if nothing had happened, but it was obvious by his behavior that hope may not be possible. Maybe I'm reading into this too much, Nicole thought to herself as Gavin walked by her desk without saying anything. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the drunken sobbing hug debacle, and things seemed to be strained between the two. Gavin, for one, seemed keen to keep distance between them. He still messaged her to come in his office to get a morning list of Totos, but other than that he was scarcely seen near her. When they were together there was no easy-going banter, no half-hearted jokes or sly, witty remarks. Things had fallen back to the staunch professionalism that he had shown her in her trial week. In her turn, Nicole attempted to meet him with equal professionalism, restricting her comments to those that were business-related and giving him a wide berth when they passed each other in the corridors. She never wanted to be one of those women who defined herself by her career, but, as it was, her career was one of the few things in her life she felt she could control. It was something she did well and took pride in. She wanted to keep it that way and refused to let her personal life affect that. The realization that she needed to discuss the apparent elephant in the room with the elephant himself loomed large in front of her. Near the end of business on Friday she found herself standing in front of Gavin's office, wondering if it was worth it, putting herself up for criticism like this. She decided to give the cosmos one last second to send her sign, good or bad. As the seconds ticked by and no catastrophe or wayward dove made itself seen, she took it that a lack of an answer was an affirmative response, tapped on the door and, without waiting for the inevitable come-in, pushed her way in. Gavin was sitting behind his desk, looking expectantly at the door. He seemed surprised to see it reveal Nicole. "Ms. Duffeck, to what do I owe this visit?" he asked calmly, though, had Nicole been a psychic she would have found that his mind was whirling, kicking up thoughts like a dust devil kicks up debris. "I'm a selfish person," Nicole blurted out. Gavin stared at her, not sure of what to make of this declaration. "I feel that if I'm honest with you and keep you as well informed as possible, the better you are able to assist me in getting through my day. If only our clients were as logically blessed as you," Gavin replied, not entirely jokingly. Nicole smiled benignly and continued. "I value my job here and I appreciate that you put yourself on the line to give me this opportunity. Before you continue, I would like to know if I should be expecting the worst." Gavin cut across her. "Is it your intentions to submit your 2 weeks' notice?" Nicole studied his face for a moment, wondering if that was what he wanted or not. Unfortunately his face was as unreadable as the stone images of Easter Island. "No, I don't want to quit," Nicole answered, noticing that Gavin's face seemed to visibly relax and a hint of, dare she say, happiness brightened his eyes. "I was concerned though that, because of what happened the night I found out about Ryan, that our working relationship has become strained," she said, trying to keep the words from tumbling out at high speeds. Gavin leaned forward in his chair, his fingers creating a triangle for him to rest his chin on as he studied the floor near her feet. Nicole didn't wait for him to respond but continued with the rest of her speech. "I know how much you love this company, how hard you've worked to make it what it is, and how much respect and loyalty you have for your clients. I can't pretend to have the same sense of personal investment in it as you do, but I do have loyalties to my career and my future. Whether I remain at Malon Inc. until I retire or I go on to something back in the States, this job is going to be a factor in any of my future endeavors. How well I do or don't do here will affect whatever comes next, and I don't want it to all be undone because I couldn't hold my liquor." Gavin took a deep breath and stood. As he rounded his desk and assumed his regular perch on the edge, Nicole inhaled, bracing herself for whatever he was about to say. "My opinion of you and my appreciation for the exemplary work you've done here hasn't changed. At no point have I ever doubted my decision to hire you," Gavin replied. Nicole smiled, feeling as if a great weight had been removed from her chest. "Thank you." Gavin nodded in response. "Before you leave, there is one other matter we need to discuss." Nicole paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Is this going to be bad?" she asked, half kidding. "That depends on your answer." "Have you made arrangements for the charity ball?" Gavin replied gravely. Nicole squirmed some. "No, with Ryan, you know, not going, well," Nicole let the sentence trail off into oblivion. "I see. While it is certainly not required for you to attend, it would definitely be an excellent opportunity for you to mingle with those who are worth your career to mingle with. Nicole nodded and replied, I thought I would look kind of lame showing up stag and all. While most do in fact use these events as opportunities to show off their hair, clothes, and significant others, there are those of us who go merely to be entertained. You'll be going alone too? Nicole asked before she could catch herself. As a matter of fact, I will be. Perhaps we could set a new trend. Gavin said. Are you asking me to go alone? Nicole teased. Are you accepting? He questioned, not missing a beat. Nicole smiled. I'll see you there. She entered the hall and mingled for a few moments with clients of the firm that she recognized, easing into the situation. She was speaking with an elderly man and laughed at a joke he had told her about Parliament when she saw Gavin across the room smiling at her. Kindly she excused herself from the gentleman and walked over to where Gavin was. Good evening, he said, smiling at her. Good evening yourself. Nicole grinned back. You look even more impeccably handsome than usual, she said approvingly of his contemporary tuxedo. Thank you, I felt I may have been outdone if I hadn't pulled out all the stops. Nicole laughed at his attempt at using American slang. Gavin grinned sheepishly and actually blushed. Are you enjoying yourself? Yeah, it's not that bad after all, thank you for talking me into coming. Thank you for allowing me to talk you into coming. I'm afraid I would have had a lot of explaining to do with the gentlemen guests if you were absent. You seem to have built quite a repertoire with them. I've noticed that too. Apparently I have a talent for schmoozing old men. She agreed, nodding towards the gentleman she had been speaking with prior to joining Gavin. I wouldn't brag about that too loudly, the women in this country still chase their husbands with rolling pins, you know. I don't think they would think too much of catching the other woman a few times just for good measure. They were approached by a few middle-aged women who wanted to speak to them about current affairs. As the women were walking away, Nicole overheard them saying that even though Nicole was younger than Gavin, they made a cute couple. Nicole cast a sidelong look at Gavin and saw him looking at his shoes. I think the neighbors are talking, Nicole whispered conspiratorially to Gavin. I think you're right. Shall we give them something to talk about? He asked, holding his hand out to her. His eyes were shining with mischief and a devilish grin was on his lips. Without hesitation she placed her hand in his and allowed herself to be escorted to the dance floor as a slow festive song began to play from the orchestra. Nicole placed her hand lightly on his shoulder as he held her other hand gently. She noted with irrational pleasure that his hands were strong and warm but held her smaller hand gently. He moved with easy grace, making her forget she barely knew how to dance at all. Though there was distance between their bodies, she could have sworn she could feel his presence on hers. Oh, this isn't good, Nicole thought to herself as she looked up at him and felt her stomach tingle. Desperately she racked her brain for something to say, certain that the continued silence would lead to him guessing that she was finding herself increasingly more attracted to him. Maybe it was inevitable. He was good-looking and wealthy to be sure, yet more than that he was kind, thoughtful, intelligent and easy to be with. Is there something on your mind? Gavin asked kindly. See. She was quiet too long. Groping her brain for something to say that wouldn't sound stupid or incriminating, she quickly came up with a question. Actually, yeah, that night you picked me up from the pub, what were you doing there? Nan said you aren't much of a barfly. Gavin regarded her for a moment, seemingly struggling with how best to answer the question. Finally he replied, the man you were seeing, Ryan, his father is an acquaintance of mine. I had spoken to him that day and he told me Ryan had gotten engaged the day before to his girlfriend. I was concerned about how you may react to it, so I called your grandmother, who told me you had gone to the pub with Sashi and Margaret. You knew? Nicole had stopped dancing and was standing stock still in front of him, her hands now clenched at her side in fists. That Ryan was seeing someone else? Yes, Gavin's face had assumed the stony, unreadable quality Nicole had suddenly come to dislike. And you didn't tell me? You just let me continue on like some ignorant ass? Tell me, did you get some sick perverted pleasure out of waiting to see me get dumped? Gavin had the decency to look appalled at first, then regained his composure. I didn't know you were unaware of his other girlfriend. I don't believe this. You still thought, even after seeing the pictures from the D.S office, that I didn't assume anything. Gavin cut in, looking angry. Rather than losing her nerve under the fiery glare and menacing tone of his voice, Nicole stepped closer to him so she was mere inches away, close enough to smell his cologne. What was the point, then, of checking in on me? Did you want to see if I was with him that night? Or did you think that maybe he dumped me and I would be an easy lay? Gavin's demeanor quickly changed from angry to livid, his voice lowering still more to a dangerously quiet tone. If you recall, that night I brought you back to my place and didn't touch you. If you recall, you were the one that threw yourself at me. Had I any intentions, I would have been in a perfect position to take advantage of you, though at that point I don't think it would have taken any coaxing. Nicole was appalled and stood silent for a moment in disbelief. Tongue-tied, she turned to walk away, then stopped and faced Gavin again. You know, I think I'm getting a pretty good idea why your wife left you. She spat contemptuously. Not waiting for a response, she walked out of the hall as quickly as she could without looking back. Nicole got back home in record time and went upstairs without saying anything to her grandparents. She peeled her dress off and donned a pair of jeans and a sweater and paced her room, throwing angry glares at the dress that now lay across her bed as if it had been the one that had insulted her. There was a knock on her door. Nan, I really don't want to talk to anyone right now, Nicole said to the closed door. Despite her proclamation, the door opened, but instead of Nan it was Margaret and Sashi. We saw you tear out of the ball as if your heels were on fire. What's going on? Margaret asked, settling on the bed next to the discarded dress. Nothing, I don't want to talk about it right now, Nicole replied vehemently. Did Gavin say something? I saw you two dancing together, Sashi asked from the doorframe. Did you guys know that Ryan was seeing someone else? Nicole accused. No, not until you told us, Margaret replied, looking shocked. Why? Apparently Gavin did and didn't tell me. He figured I knew and didn't care. We got into an argument, I told him off and left. You're kidding, Sashi stated, now settling next to Margaret as if she were readying herself for a must-see show. No, I'm not, the son of a bitch, Nicole spat. Well, I was actually talking about you telling Gavin off. Love, you're lucky if he doesn't sack you. Well, I'm sure that Gavin had a reason for not saying anything. How did he find out in the first place? Margaret asked gently, ignoring Sashi. Because he's a business friend with Ryan's dad, Nicole answered. Sashi and Margaret exchanged knowing looks. What? Nicole asked harshly. When you first started, we told you how protective Gavin was of his company. He won't do anything to risk it or his reputation, Sashi said plainly. How would it have damaged his reputation if he told me his friend's son was a pig? Nicole asked, getting angrier by the second. Like that, Margaret said. If Gavin told you, then you would have gone to Ryan and bitched him out, probably bringing Gavin's name in as to how you found out he was cheating on his girlfriend. Ryan would have told his father would have started a smear campaign against Gavin, getting everyone's support on Ryan's side by feeding bullshit lines like boys will be boys, or claiming Gavin was hot for you, or Ryan jilted you and you were just trying to get even with him. Either way, Gavin would have been drug into it and his reputation would have been compromised. People would think he's either treacherous or that he's a gossip. It's not just that, though it's still not excusable. It's that he figured I probably knew and didn't care. That I'm some hussy that goes around sleeping with other people's men or cheating on my own. Why would he think you were cheating on someone? Sashi asked, leaning forward. Nicole sighed heavily, may as well be out with all of it. I left the US because my husband was cheating on me. When I found out, we got into a huge fight and he beat me up. I flipped and thought I could do with a change of venue. Nan and Pops let me come stay with them. Not long after I started at Malon Inc., Gavin heard about Ryan and I, then Jason, my ex, called and referred to himself as my husband. Right after that he found out about why I really moved here, but, I dunno. Oh my God, Nicole, I'm so sorry. Why didn't you tell us? We're your friends. Margaret oozed, standing and wrapping her arms around Nicole. I didn't say anything because I didn't. She stopped talking in mid-sentence, struck dumb by her own fallacious argument. Didn't want your reputation compromised. Sashi offered helpfully. Nicole nodded mutely. Something like that. Shit, I think I've made a mess of this. It's not so much that you made a mess of this so much as made a pig's ear of yourself. Sashi said, leaning back with her arms folded across her chest. Don't be so hard about it, Sash, you'd have done the same thing. Margaret chastised. Which is why I have every right to set her straight. I'm speaking from experience. Sashi retorted. What are you going to do? Margaret asked Nicole. I'm not apologizing, not entirely anyway. She replied glumly. He knew about Jason. Nicole shook her head. What? Margaret's head snapped up. The weekend I helped him with the trial, he came across my file, the one with the police photos in it. He knew what I went through with Jason. Nicole stammered, wondering why her cheeks were flushing so profusely at this revelation. I'm confused. The man is just your boss. Sure, he should have acted like a human being, but, well, I mean, it's Gavin, right? Which brings us back to the bit of him being a sadistic workaholic who's madly in love with his company and sees anything else as either secondary or something that's in the way of the all-encompassing Malon Inc. Sashi observed. I dunno. Nicole replied, looking at the carpet sheepishly. I guess I just hoped or thought. Nicole let the thought trail, admonishing herself for not being able to complete a sentence like an adult. Oh! Margaret exclaimed, her hand over her mouth. Nicole, do you? Sashi's head had snapped up, apparently aware that the saga had not yet ended. What? What did I miss? She asked hopefully. Ignoring Sashi, Margaret started fixedly at Nicole as if she were growing wings and a tail. Nicole, what are your feelings for Gavin? Gavin? Hooted Sashi. What would it matter what she feels? Oh. Sashi said, looking agog at Nicole. You fancy Gavin? You are in a right state. Margaret grabbed a pillow and chucked it at Sashi, which hit its intended target on the side of her head, though did nothing to remove the scandalized look on her face. Look, both of you, my feelings at this point, whatever they may be, are completely irrelevant. For one, he thinks I'm a promiscuous tramp, and for another, there is no way he feels anything remotely similar towards me. Why would you think that? Margaret soothed. Nicole rolled her eyes and stared at Margaret, sure her friend was just patronizing her wounded heart. He's older than I am, wealthy, more accomplished, and intelligent. In short, he's out of my league. I hate baseball metaphors. Sashi interjected. Noticing she was out of ammunition, Margaret chose to ignore this, save shooting the other woman a withering look that went completely ignored. You never know, maybe he is attracted to you and just never said anything because he figured you were attached. The only way to find out is to ask him. Since when have you been a champion for passions other than lust? Margaret asked skeptically. Hey, I love a good love story as much as the next woman. Sashi answered defensively. Just because I don't go around mooning over hearts, roses, and the like doesn't mean I'm without feminine emotions, you cow. Sashi answered, sounding hurt. So what do you propose I do about this? Nicole asked, more out of masochistic curiosity than anything. Tell him. Sashi answered plainly. Go round to his place, open your heart to him in all its gooey glory and let him decide what to do with it. If he feels the same then great, if not then at least you can say you tried and not sit stewing over what might have been until you're an old woman with an ulcer and a dirty conscience full of regret. What if I'm not fired though and I do go and tell him I love him and he changes his mind and decides I'm a detriment to the firm? He fires me and I lose the bloke and the job. Nicole argued back. First off, he'd be a right cat if he fired you because you were attracted to him. Secondly, if you tell him plainly that it won't affect your performance, I'm sure that, given your previous work history, he would feel obligated to give you the benefit of the doubt. Tell him you have feelings for him, and if he doesn't feel the same way you will continue to work for him with no further discussion on the matter. If he finds it impossible over time for you two to be able to work compatibly, then he has every right to discharge you. Margaret explained. Nicole stopped pacing and sat next to Sashi on the bed. After a few long minutes of silence, Nicole asked quietly, "What do you think my chances are?" Sashi put her arm around Nicole in an uncharacteristic show of compassion and said soothingly, "I really don't know, mate. With a bloke like Gavin who keeps himself so reserved, it's anyone's guess, but at this point there are only two options: keep your mouth shut and always wonder, or take a leap and risk falling flat on your face." "Sweetie," Nicole jumped at the sound of her nan's voice. "I told you when you first moved here that Gavin's a great man, very kind and generous, not quite the ogre that people make him out to be. Granted, he is very business-orientated, but he's also a human being. If you tell him how you feel, then he will be understanding, even if he doesn't reciprocate." "Nan. How long were you standing there?" "Nicole. Long enough to know what I'm talking about," she replied. "Your friends are mostly right. There's the chance that it won't be what you want to hear, but if we all went through life acting only when it would cause us to receive the outcome we wanted, we would have very dull, empty lives indeed." The four women passed a few more minutes in silence before Margaret broke it this time. "So, what are you going to do?" Nicole looked down at the floor and shook her head solemnly. "I'm going to tell him." "Tell who what?" asked Pops, who had just appeared in the hallway. "Your granddaughter has feelings for Gavin Malon," Nan said matter-of-factly. "You're just coming to that now?" "Land's woman, I've had that idea for months now, way she didn't go too far with that Ryan bloke." "Where've you been?" he asked and shuffled off. Deciding it best to not waste time, Nicole set off to Gavin's estate the next afternoon. She had dressed carefully, hoping she looked as if she put some consideration into her appearance too, but still not come across like she was desperate. Too bad her nerves couldn't be calmed by nice clothes. Her heart was hammering in her chest, her mouth felt dry and her hands were trembling as she pulled in the long winding drive that would take her to Gavin's front door. As she put the car in park, she noted that the light in the living room was showing through the windows, a sure indication that someone was home. Steeling herself, she opened the car door and made her way to the front door, reciting her speech in her mind. Her heart was pumping so hard she could hear the blood rush in her ears as she timidly knocked on the door. For a fleeting moment she hoped he didn't hear her or that he wasn't home so she could make her retreat unseen. Damn, Nicole thought as she heard the door being opened. No such luck. "Ms. Duffeck, what brings you by this afternoon?" Gavin asked, his voice betraying. "Nothing." Oh God, he was good looking. As he opened the door, she found herself staring at his feet before she had the common sense to raise her eyes, taking in his burgundy-colored dress shirt, which was, uncharacteristically, not tucked. The top 3 buttons were undone, allowing her to glimpse the smooth, unblemished skin of his upper chest and neck. Nicole noted irrationally that he didn't get much sun, as his skin was pale and free from the signs of tanning, fake or otherwise. Finally, after what may have been an imprudently long silence on her part, she moved her eyes to his face, which was looking into hers with patient expectation. Her well-rehearsed speech abandoned her at the last moment, leaving her to stutter idiotically in front of him. I wanted to, well, apologize for the way I acted the other night, you know." "Oh yeah, that'll win him over." the night of the ball. I know I probably should have waited, or maybe, chosen a better place. Nicole sighed heavily and tried to regain some sense of composure. She made the mistake of looking him in the eye and nearly lost all of her nerve as she saw him squinting at her as if he were regarding some difficult enigma. Finally she decided enough was enough. With everything you know about me, and the months we've had to build a working relationship, I thought you should have had enough respect for me to let me know what kind of a man Ryan was. Nicole dropped her gaze for a moment, but only for a moment before forcing herself to look him straight in the eye. I also think that I acted inappropriately. I shouldn't have brought that up in such a public setting. I allowed my personal feelings to get in the way of my better judgment, and for that I am sorry. If you do see fit to discharge me, I fully understand and wouldn't hold it against you. At this last part Gavin laughed and looked away. Before he could agree or disagree with it, Nicole hurried on to get out the last, most personal reason for her showing up. Before you decide anything though, I wanted to say one more thing. Nicole stopped short as a fair complected, brown-haired woman appeared behind Gavin and placed her hand lightly on his arm in a too familiar fashion. Gavin, so sorry to interrupt, but where do you keep the corkscrew? She said, gesturing with a bottle of red wine for emphasis. Ah, Nicole said, taking a step back. Sorry, I didn't know you were. I'll leave you to it, she said lamely. As she was hurrying down the porch stairs, she heard Gavin murmur to his female companion, "I'll be right back. The bottle opener is in the drawer next to the sink." Gavin caught up to Nicole as she was opening the driver's side door and, to ensure he had her attention, put his hand on the frame, preventing it from opening. Nicole gazed at the long thin fingers and admitted defeat. "What did you need to tell me?" he asked, his tone even and calm. "Nothing of importance really, it can wait." Gavin sighed and pulled himself up to his full height, an act that made him look masculine and impressive, at least to Nicole's overactive mind. "If there is some issue that needs to be addressed, I would rather have it out now so it's not hanging over us. I imagine that a lack of communication on both our parts has provided fertile grounds for arguments that could have otherwise been avoided." Nicole glanced back to the house and saw the woman rummaging in the kitchen, presumably in search of the elusive corkscrew. "It really doesn't have precedence over work or anything. It can wait until after the weekend. Enjoy your visit," Nicole said flatly. Gavin studied her face for a moment before he removed his hand from her door and allowed her entry. The last time Nicole had found herself driving around aimlessly, her life had been turned upside down by a series of events she had, over time, come to understand were not her fault. Now, as she drove around the countryside of a completely different country on a continent that lay across an ocean from the original, she found herself wondering how much of this go-around was her own doing. He had a girlfriend, or maybe they were just romantically involved with each other. Regardless, it meant that her feelings were pointless. She thought about how she trusted him, laughed with him, the way he appreciated her. For all these reasons she had become attracted to him. When she felt she was at her worst point in life, he had seen enough of who she really was to treat her like a person. When she was around him, speaking with him, working with him, she felt like the old her, the one that wasn't afraid to speak her mind and be heard, the one that would argue the benefits of opera and rap, the one that wasn't afraid to trust. Admittedly, there were times had spoken to her like an und Erling, times when he could have done with more discretion in his choice of words, but she herself was guilty of this too and couldn't hold it against him. She had pulled over to the side of the road and was sitting on the hood of the car watching the sunset when her cell phone rang. She had thought to let the call go to voicemail when she noticed the name on the screen was her grandmother. Knowing her Nan hated cell phones and would avoid using them except in emergencies, she reached over and pressed the on button. "Hi Nan. Sweetie, where are you?" Nan asked, sounding concerned. "Midway, why, what's wrong?" "Jamie's husband Scott called. The baby was born premature and is in intensive care. Jamie isn't doing so well either. I'll be home in a few minutes." Nicole said, hurrying back to her car. As she drove, she punched in numbers and held her breath. Hello. Came the muffled voice. Scott, this is Nikki. How are you? Nicole asked concernedly. A deep heavy sigh preceded his answer. Tired, I don't know. Scared. Nicole heard him sigh again and felt her heart go out to him. The baby's in an incubator, he's being monitored around the clock. Jamie's in intensive care. They think they've stopped the bleeding, but his voice trailed off and in its wake left the sound of his futility. How are you? He asked. I'm all right. Look, things are really slow at work. She lied. I can take some time off and come back home for a while, just to hang out until things calm down a bit. You don't have to do that, I know tickets aren't cheap. His words were polite but his voice sounded hopeful. Don't worry, I'll catch the next flight out. I'll call you when I get in. Nicole answered. Next she called the airline and booked a flight for Tuesday morning. Scott was right, the tickets weren't cheap, especially not at such short notice, but all things considered it was the least of her concerns. When she got back to her grandparents' house she told them what was happening and what she planned to do. Oh, I hope she's okay. Nan exclaimed, wringing her hands. Did Scott tell you anything more? No, he sounded tired and beat, I didn't want to keep him on the phone too long. Nicole replied as she opened her suitcase. I was worried I might say something wrong. You know, like if the baby was a boy or a girl and what they named them. I didn't know if I should say congratulations or not. Nicole let the thought drop off. Nan stood by in silence for a moment, then entered the room and helped Nicole pack in silence. Nicole spent most of Monday finishing things up. She called the office and after being told that Gavin was in court left the message that she was called back to the States suddenly for a family emergency and would be away indeterminately. She promised to write or call when more information was available and expressed her deepest sorrow for only being able to give incredibly short notice. Tuesday morning at dawn her grandparents drove her to Heathrow. You come here after something terrible happens and leave because something terrible happens. You must have the worst impression of England now. Nan said, teary-eyed. Not at all, Nan. I loved being here with all of you and all of this. Nicole stared out the window as the plane soared over the Atlantic again. This time her nerves knew what to expect and only jangled slightly at takeoff. Though she was exhausted, her mind relentlessly scanned thought after thought, refusing to let her sleep. As arranged, Scott met Nicole at the airport and, upon threat of bodily harm, took her directly to the hospital. Jamie was shockingly pale and her skin looked too tight for her body, but she is sitting up, well propped up against pillows. Hi sweetie. Jamie said, sounding weak but excited. Hi hon, how are you? Jamie rolled her eyes. You know, same old same old. How about yourself? Just duck it. So how long until you can get out of here? I think we need a few rounds to celebrate the new bambino. Jamie chuckled before the pain in her stomach caught up to her, causing her to take a quick breath and close her eyes to control the sudden pang. Much more somberly Nicole questioned. Are you going to be okay? Yeah, I'll be fine, don't worry about me. Jamie replied. Nicole's stomach clenched in apprehension as she noticed her friend's pallor had gone even paler than it had been before. After a few more breaths Jamie had regained enough of herself to. Gabriel is doing fine though. The doctors say he's eating well and can leave in about 2 weeks. They want to keep him until his weight is. Jamie, that's great. Nicole remarked, unable to contain her joy. They spent a few happy minutes discussing Jamie's plans for the baby's room and the clothes they had already bought for him when the nurse came in. Nicole took her leave, not wanting to make Jamie any more uncomfortable than she already was. I'll swing by the nursery and let Gab know you're doing okay. If you want I can stop by tomorrow for a visit. Nicole offered. That'd be great. I'll do my makeup and everything. Jamie joked. The following day, as promised, Nicole returned and, at Jamie's overwhelming insistence, told her about the sights she'd seen and the people she had met, leaving out the bad parts like Ryan being engaged to another woman and Gavin's actions thereafter. "It sounds like a fairy tale. I'd love to go there someday," Jamie said wistfully. "Well, next time I go you can tag along, bring the boys with you even. Nan and Pops would love having the baby running around, gives them someone to spoil." "So are you going to move back there?" Jamie finally asked. Nicole thought for a moment before saying, "No, I don't think so. I love the people and the work and the atmosphere and everything, but this is home." "You're such a liar," Jamie replied. "What are you talking about?" Nicole asked, startled. "First of all, you left parts out of your story. I know about that Ryan guy and I know that you fell in love with your boss, but that you freaked out on him and never told him you loved him, and that's why you freaked out. Don't look so surprised. Your Nan emailed Renee and she called me and told me all this before I went into labor with Gab. Why wouldn't you tell me this?" Jamie asked, sounding somewhat hurt. Nicole shrugged. "I didn't want to bother you with it. That's not fair. You deal with everyone else's problems, you try to deal with your own, but there's a point when you have to hand over some stuff to other people, otherwise it's going to kill you," Jamie said softly but sternly. "When your dad got sick you tried single-handedly to make sure he was taken care of. You visited him every weekend and handled his affairs for him because he asked you to. But he didn't ask you to do it alone. When you got hurt by Jason you didn't call anyone, you just went off on your own until you snapped and ended up at Renee's house. I love you, but you've always been this way. You feel this need to be strong for everyone and not let anyone see that you have a crack in your armor. Do you think we'd lose respect for you or see you in a dimmer light? Because that's not the case. Jamie, you are in the hospital with a, don't, okay. Just stop right there. You are not going to change the subject. Focus on what I'm telling you, Nikki. Alright, I do it because I want everyone to be happy, and because if I take care of it then I have some sense of control, like I have some control over the outcome, like I can nudge fate into doing what should be done. You know that's not possible, no one can control everything all the time." Jamie soothed. "Yeah, I figured that one out," Nicole replied dejectedly. "So first things first, what are we going to do about Gavin?" Nicole laughed and nearly fell over. "We? You, my dear, are lying in a hospital bed and your son is in NICU. We aren't going to do anything. You are going to lie there until you get better. After that then we'll see," Nicole replied. "I can help you even from this bed. Get a pen and paper." Nicole felt such a wash of nostalgia at those 5 words she nearly got dizzy, but obeyed nonetheless. When she had settled back in her seat, Jamie began to dictate a letter. "Dear Gavin, I love you. I'm sorry I acted like a prat. I'm a what now?" Nicole asked, laughing. "You spent all that time in the UK and you didn't pick up any of the slang?" Jamie asked incredulously. "Yeah, I picked it up, I just thought you sounded funny," Nicole replied, grinning. "Shut up and write," Jamie ordered. "Look, I get the idea. I'll write him a letter and explain everything. If you want I'll even let you mail it out," Nicole said, stuffing the notebook and pen away. "Though I don't think it will do much good." "Don't be so pessimistic, sweetie. For all you know he is sitting there wishing you would call him or something so he can tell you he misses you too." If she allowed herself to say so out loud she would have told Jamie that was exactly what she was hoping for. "You should know though that the last time I saw him he was with another woman." "What?" Jamie cried, nearly climbing out of bed. "What is with you and these unavailable men? What happened?" Nicole told Jamie everything about the last meeting, this time omitting nothing. Jamie sat quietly for a moment, thinking before she finally said, "Maybe she isn't his girlfriend, maybe she's just a friend or a relative. Did she look like him at all?" "I don't know, I didn't really pay much attention to her aside from her being female and holding a bottle of wine. Nicole said remorsefully. So there's all the more reason to write him. The beauty of doing it through a letter is, for one, you can't stick your foot in your mouth, and for another, if he doesn't feel the same about you, then he can just throw the letter away and you never hear from him again. If he never writes me back, then I'll always wonder if he get the letter or if it got lost in the mail or something. Nicole moaned. You could send it certified, or through a courier. Then you'll know he got it? Jamie offered. Nothing says true love like a tracking number, who? Nicole answered, laughing. Are you going to do it? Jamie asked soberly. Of course. Nicole was staying with Renee while she decided what she wanted to do. After she got back from visiting at the hospital, she sat at a desk with a pen at the ready over a piece of paper, thinking about what she wanted to say. After an hour of staring into space, she finally began to just blurt everything, paying no attention to flow or rhythm or even grammar. The thoughts that had been racing around in her head, bouncing off the walls of her cranium, finally took shape in the form of words and sentences. The first letter, completely unsophisticated, honest, desperate, and sappy, it was definitely in need of some revision. After 3 hours, Nicole sat back and surveyed her creation. The letter was about 1.5 pages in length and sounded honest and heartfelt, but yet maintained some dignity. Pleased and resolute, she sealed the letter and dropped it in the mailbox. 10 days after Nicole had sent the letter, Jamie and Gabriel were discharged from the hospital, both having received clean bills of health. Wanting to give them a worthwhile welcome home present, Nicole had spent the previous 24 hours cleaning their house from top to bottom, leaving only the baby room untouched. She kept gushing about how she wanted to decorate it and how she would like to organize it when I had been visiting her. I don't think we should take that away from her, Nicole told Scott as she closed the door to the baby's room. Good point. She was telling me the other day that she's worried they haven't had any time to bond. She's afraid he won't know who she is or be comforted by her when she does hold him. Maybe this will help her feel better, he replied seriously. Nicole smiled before saying, she's worrying about not being able to bond with a person that she carried for 8 months. Mothers are so weird. The homecoming party was small and subdued due to the fragility of mom and baby, but was festive nonetheless. Jamie was in tears over the thoughtfulness of the gesture of a clean house and incredibly pleased that the only things that had been done to the baby's room was the assembling of the furniture. You even left the sheets and clothes in the bag, she cried gleefully, extracting the crib sheets from the dry cleaning bag they were being stored in. A full 3 weeks had elapsed since Nicole had sent out the letter. She sighed, knowing full well what it meant. Though she didn't send it certified or with a courier, she knew it had been received and knew that the lack of response was a resounding answer to her question. She resigned herself to the idea that she had no job to return to in England and no place of her own to move to there, and decided to stay in the United States. Nicole was outside working in the barn throwing hay bales down to the lower level when a movement from the open door caught her eye. Thinking it was the dog, she yelled out, "Move away from there, you silly old beast, or I'll bean you with a hay bale." My apologies, I didn't see a no loitering sign posted in the vicinity, the voice returned. Nicole was so startled by this response she had to catch onto a beam lest she fall over the side and into the mow below. Straightening, she looked towards the direction of the voice and squinted against the dust-infused sunlight, where she saw the outline of a man leaning in the doorway of the barn, his hands resting casually in his pants pockets. Nicole couldn't make out his face but knew who it was from the voice and posture. "1 minute, let me get down from here," she mumbled as she fruitlessly tried to brush hay and dust from her clothes and hair. "Is this a bad time?" the voice called. "No, I saw something moving down here and thought it was the dog. I was just getting some chores done. All things considered, I think I owe you one for interrupting it," Nicole said, brushing her hands off after she descended the old wooden ladder. Looking up, she saw that Gavin had moved just inside the barn, so the sun was no longer at his back, giving her the benefit of seeing his face unobstructed. His jaw was shadowed by the beginnings of a 5 o'clock shadow and his clothes looked rumpled as if he had been wearing them for a few days. "Hi," she said meekly, standing a few feet away from him. "What a time to wonder if my antiperspirant is working," Nicole thought lamely. "Hello," Gavin murmured back, taking a few steps forward so they were standing only a few inches from one another. He slowly reached a hand towards her and plucked a piece of straw from her hair without saying a word. The act made Nicole's skin tingle and her breath catch in her throat. What brings you to Wisconsin?" she asked quietly. Gavin lowered his hand and reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a piece of paper which he extended to her before answering. "You did?" Nicole's hand was trembling as she took the letter he showed her. "This is the letter I sent you," she said, staring at her handwriting. "It is." Nicole looked up and saw his eyes were transfixed on her. "The woman that was at my place when you came by is my ex-sister-in-law. She had stopped over so I could help her draw up her will and the power of attorney for my nephew." "Oh," Nicole said, her mind racing. Before she could continue, Gavin was speaking again. "I should have told you how I feel about you. I just didn't think it would come to any good though, what with the age difference and my apparently looking like a dog." Nicole burst out laughing and noticed that Gavin too was smiling widely. "I missed you," she finally managed to say after the peals of laughter subsided. "Why did you come back to the States then?" The smile was now gone, his eyes looking sad. "My friend had a baby and there were complications. No one really knew what to expect, so I thought it best if I came back, you know, for support or whatever," she concluded. "Are they all right?" Gavin asked, sounding genuinely concerned. Nicole's heart swelled with the thought that he was compassionate towards her friend, even though he had never met her before. "Yeah, they both got to go home 2 days ago. Gabriel, her son, is still at a higher risk for colds and ear infections and whatnot, but that will go away over time as he gains weight. Jamie has to take it easy for a while so she doesn't overexert herself and end up back in the hospital, but her husband is a good guy. He'll make sure she doesn't exhaust herself." This brings me back to the part where I asked you why you were here, which I answered. "Right, you said you came here because of me, then you told me you should have said how you felt before, which insinuates you have strong feelings for me, but I'd rather no assume anything." "I think we've done something like this before," Gavin said, smiling. "May I have that back, please?" he asked, indicating the letter Nicole held in her hands. After a moment of scribbling on the back of the paper, he handed it back to her. 12/24/06 I am in love with you. Will you marry me? Signed, Gavin Malon. Her world reeled, her knees threatened to give out underneath her and her head felt as if it were going to explode with 1,000 thoughts and questions, each of which was shattering into 1,000 more thoughts as they ricocheted off of the narrow confines of her skull. He's here for me. He wants to be with me. Am I ready for this? Am I ready at all? Gavin, I don't know what to say, she choked out. Her lips trembled. She didn't want to lose him again, not when she just found she had him to lose, but what? She looked up and saw his face tighten, his eyes harden, as if he were steeling himself against her rejection. "If this isn't right, just tell me," he implored, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not that." Nicole sighed and closed her eyes. "I can't tell you how selfish this is. I want to be with you, I really do, but," he urged, "I don't know if it would be fair to you." He looked at the floor and shook his head. "If you're going to ask me if we can be friends, I may do myself a harm," he warned. Nicole laughed. "God, Gavin, I'm in love with you. I don't think I would ever be satisfied if we were just friends. But right now, there's so much about me I'm not sure of yet." Nicole paused, trying to find the right words. "Like what?" he asked after the silence had stretched on. "Like who I really am. I know I keep falling back on this, but my relationship with Jason and the way it ended, I'm still trying to figure out who I am without him, who I want to be. She looked down at the barn floor, littered with years of loose hay and dust. Her eyes began to fill with tears. Are you asking me to wait for you? Gavin asked, his voice not betraying anything. Unable to face him, Nicole continued to study the floor. I know I can't ask you to do that, as much as I would love to say yes. She replied, feeling as if she were breaking her own heart. I know who you are, and if I have to wait for a year. He took a step towards her. 5 years, another step, 20 years, there was hardly a sliver of floor between them now. For you to be sure you know who that is too. Gavin's gaze flicked from her eyes to her mouth, to her hair, and back to her eyes. Then let me wait. At a loss for words, she stumbled forward and felt his arms close around her. At first all he did was hold her in his arms, reveling in the feeling of her body against his, the smell of her hair and the sensation of the moment. After a small eternity, Nicole felt Gavin's hand caressing her cheek, slowly and delicately, with such tenderness she was afraid to move for fear that it would break the spell. Taking a chance, she opened her eyes and raised them to look into his face. His eyes were warm, his lips smiling slightly, and his head was tilted a little to one side. Gavin, I want to kiss you, Nicole said, her voice no more than a whisper. With a gentleness Nicole never thought possible, he leaned over and brushed his lips slowly across hers, raising her chin lightly with his fingers as he stroked the line of her jaw tenderly. Bursts of energy raced through Nicole, making her nerves sing with pleasure as she kissed him back, deeply and passionately. Breathing heavily, he pulled back for a moment and regarded her unabashedly. His mind was blissfully disengaged, only able to focus blissfully on the woman before him.